got in there and started moving stuff around.
Yes, he pissed off all of us.
Yes.
I was standing down in the creek bed protecting my trees
You got into this area.
with Ron.
We're just trying to figure out.
I know, I remember.
Did they have a
And then he
conflict or
started
something?
getting it with the people.
Well, the thing is,
I was standing down in my creek bed,
Good, yeah?
stopping him.
Well, sometimes things come up.
yeah, I got several phone calls that week.
Well, and then he
Oh,
tried.
it's next door. I'm like, who's
over here.
constructing this?
He tried to put it down over the creek bed near my house. I said, yeah, you're not. That's
That's
illegal.
kind of why I was out there is because
Well, you had to.
Yeah, Rod.
he has cleaned this area. First all these
Okay.
trees are just Christine, Burgess Farmer. So she's being,
Oh, yeah.
and so I went to take that line so everybody could see where that line is.
Yeah.
And then we went and set this corner, make sure.
Oh, just tell me when you're ready,
Yeah.
Deborah. I'll go ahead and get us started.
Oh, we are starting.
Okay, we're recording.
Okay, we're going to bring this meeting to order at 2:01. Let's start with a roll call.
Sheena Martinez, District 1.
Paul Carey for District 2.
Phil King from District 3 is not currently here,
David Mers, District 4.
Herb Dyer, District 5.
and Darren Schroeder, Mayor. Great.
David, I didn't see you sneak in. No.
He's a sneaker.
Yeah.
Do we have any citizens' comments? Come on. All right. Sorry. Next item. Discussion on development agreement workshop report to develop a council policy with Simple City.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. My name is Matt Lewis with Simple City Design. It's great to be back in front of you all today. We've been studying your city and analyzing your city. Last time I was not here for the DNA update to the council, and I heard that Zach and Meredith did a great job, and hopefully some of that stuff resonated with you all today, or when they did that. And we're going to kind of recap some of the stuff that we studied during that process as well. And Meredith is going to take you all on a little journey through a listening session. So we're going to just start by listening to you all first, and then we're going to dive into the actual workshop just to get some validation and those types of things. So with that, I'll turn it over to Meredith Johnson.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us again. Great to be here. Meredith Johnson, Johnson Planning and Preservation. I also want to introduce Dash, who is my new hire, first employee, so very excited to have them here. I want to first start out with some sort of larger scale validation. So first, I'd like to start with, what did you learn from the DNA analysis? What resonated with you? And we can go in a row. We can popcorn it.
Anything specific?
I'd have to refresh
I'll give you
my
a few
memory,
minutes.
but
I'll give you a few seconds,
I really
yeah.
agreed with everything I saw. I mean, I thought you guys were right on, so.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, things
I guess
that we
David-
that may have resonated. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Mayor.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say things that may have resonated. If you have specifically thought about the walkability component, if there's something there that you really picked up on, if there's something with the historic component, something that really resonated. So just, it can be as broad or as detailed as you'd like it to be.
Okay. You had a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of specific thoughts on the recommendations that you had made, the summary. So I don't know if we're going to go in particular into some of those.
I think we'll get into that in a minute, but right now I'd just like to hear, when you think of the document, is there something that stands out in your mind?
I thought it was interesting, the 5 groups that you sorted different areas of Castroville into. And I also really loved your emphasis that there are lots of ways that we can make areas that aren't perfect yet better, even though they're already there.
Cool, okay. So I'm hearing existing conditions, a lot of hope in that statement, a lot of really good visioning, okay.
Councilman Dyer?
I think you're putting a lot of emphasis on walkability, and I don't agree that it's going to turn out that way. I just don't think people will be inclined to do that much walkability or walking.
Great.
I understand what you're doing and the groupings.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand how the 3 areas relate for walkability.
Okay,
But I'm
that's
sure you're
good.
going to talk about that sooner or later. But I
urban-
just would caution, I think, in today's society, walkability is diminishing, in my opinion, as opposed to increasing. People are more dependent than ever on their cars, and I don't think that's going to change. So that's the only comment I would have.
Thank you.
I think the things that stood out to me were, you had pointed out some of the diversity of building location, situation on the lot. That was kind of interesting to me, just to see, like, if I look at something that's being built all at once, they're going to be in nice, neat rows, they're going to be equal spacing, they're going to be similar sizes, and what we see here is they're placed like this and like that, like this and like that. And it's both glorious and scary, because you see some great examples of people that have really thought it through very well, and it's welcoming, it's inviting, it's beautiful. And there are other instances where they took shortcuts and built things that are not as attractive or not as well thought out and just put up just to put up. And so,
Can I ask what, in your mind, can you elaborate a little bit on what a shortcut might be in this situation?
I must be very careful about that, because I don't
Sure.
want to call out anybody specifically.
Understand.
But the
broadly.
shortcut would be in building materials, honestly.
Okay.
So, like, there's a wide array of different types of building types, which include wood, which we don't allow in our development agreements currently. But it's more because, like, there are instances where there's plywood as your exterior wall, and that's allowed by the International Building Code. There are things that deteriorate very quickly, and you can see that they have deteriorated very quickly. And I think that's why most people are not currently allowing natural wood to be used, things like that. You see other ones,
Interesting.
like right next to us, where wood was used quite beautifully in the barn, but it was done like a specific type of wood. So the Texas mountain cedar lasts incredibly well. Cypress lasts incredibly well.
Okay, so I'm hearing materiality is something that you're really picking up on, but is
And then-
also maybe reflective of the town itself. You're picking up on it individually for the future, but you're also looking at it historically for the past.
Well, I'm looking at some of the really nice things that have been done. There are things that have been done, and it's really more qualifying what made them nice versus other things that were put up because they were cheap and quick.
Okay,
And the things that were put up cheap and quick, if those happen all en masse, then we have issues.
interesting.
If they happen in pockets, sometimes it's better to have, with some of that socioeconomic diversity, people that don't have enough money to put up a full, a rock
Yeah.
structure, and what they can afford is putting up something that is pure and
Okay.
beam, and it is, not the same height of quality.
Okay.
My preference is always to see the quality, but if we are to embrace the socioeconomic diversity, that's really where my struggle is
Yeah.
without having something in place to keep, especially things that are being built in mass with people that are just trying to make a buck off of the city right now and don't care about what happens in the future. That's the only thing that scares me. The other
Great.
stuff, I think it's really interesting how it's come about.
Okay, thank you,
You can see
Mayor.
that there's this big proliferation around the 50s, 60s, and 70s, how many homes were built in that time frame. And then you see the other pockets when, like the 80s and 90s, when a bunch of things were built. And so you see these different pockets, and they're very, they're very noticeably that era.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor.
They're dated, right?
I was going to say
Yeah.
distinct.
Yeah, they are time
Noticeable and distinct.
Yeah.
Okay, and this side of the dais?
The one thing that I didn't agree with
Yeah.
is you don't have to have a porch to sit outside with your neighbors.
Yeah, okay.
In my neighborhood, me and my neighbors, you have a driveway, you can sit out.
I love that.
And we do, we sit out.
Yeah.
And we all come together and we just sit out there, kids can run about and play.
I love that.
And we just sit back and relax. During the wintertime, we have a portable burn pit. We go from driveway to driveway. So you don't have to have a porch,
Perfect.
you know.
You're
Yeah,
making, you've got other
you
options.
got a driveway.
Yeah.
There you go.
It can do
That's your
double
porch.
duty.
Exactly.
I love that. This is really great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I'm going to kind of conflict with Councilman Dyer. I have people walking past my house all day,
Yes, sir.
every day. And it's recreation. It's not transportation. It's not commuting.
Yeah.
But people love to walk in our streets. And I want that to be perpetuated.
Interesting. So I just want to dig a little bit deeper into that because we do have two direct, ideas that are against each other in a way. When you think about that, do you think of it on a specific scale? Do you think of it in one part of it of Castroville? Do you think of it all? What do you think of?
This street is used because it's kind of the outside edge of the city.
Okay.
Because there aren't cross streets that are full of traffic.
Okay.
But they're intersecting streets full of traffic.
Okay. And I guess I want to bump that question back over to you, sir. When you think of how walkability may be impeded in Castroville, do you think of it in one specific area of Castroville? Do you think of downtown? Do you think of Castroville holistically?
But I think the biggest problem is we got a highway running right through the middle of town that separates us into two towns. And very few people walk across the highway. Very few kids.
3 times.
3 towns, you got a river too.
towns, yeah.
So,
That's true.
Anyway, it's just, it's something that TxDOT doesn't put a lot of emphasis on. Every time we come up with an idea, they shoot us down.
You shoot it down,
And
yeah.
so it's going to be difficult to facilitate
Absolutely.
walkability. I'm not against walkability. I don't walk as much as I should, but I would probably walk more if there was
Me too.
a place close enough for me to walk to.
Okay.
And I didn't have to take my life in hands crossing the highway.
So if you weren't taking your life in your hands, potentially, maybe there's some options there.
Well, I think the
This
thing
is
that,
great.
like, and I've heard arguments on both sides. I've heard people very adamantly against the walkability because they don't want to be forced to walk. And
Sure.
I think to me, this is not about forcing people to walk. This is Texas. It's hot. Like I walked down the street earlier and I didn't enjoy it. But it was quicker than getting in my car and moving over there. But to me, it's about being people-centric and not forcing them to. So, Scott had pointed this out. He's like, I didn't totally get this until I drove up to, I think it was one of the big box stores. Don't want to call them out individually, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
You don't have to
It was over by Costco on 211.
I was going
and
to call out.
That's okay.
They're
We're
just
not saying anything bad about them.
Okay.
It was about it's the fact that that as you drove up there was absolutely no pedestrian connectivity to that whole shopping center. It's all,
Oh, interesting.
vehicle centric. And, it wasn't until I kind of, after that discussion with that lens, kind of drove around and looked at things that I realized that there was a real missed opportunity because, yes, you're right, that walkability is disappearing, but I think it's disappearing not because for lack of a desire necessarily. I think part of it's because it just isn't being built that way, and it's not being built that way because it's not being required to be built that
It's
way.
not planned that way.
It's not planned, right.
Well, it's not planned that way because it's not being required to be planned that way. I think if it were required to plan, you'd see a lot more of it, but it just isn't.
And I think you've seen things like some of the H-E-B, like even the bigger ones that are in neighborhood stores. I think about there's one over on Thousand Oaks in Nacogdoches, and it's kind of in the middle of some neighborhoods. But the way that they built it was you got the backside against the houses where all of the trash and the trucks and all of that stuff go. And there's people that live right behind it that are forced to get in their cars, drive around, get out onto the main streets, and then go into the parking lot in the front, where if you had that access, I'd bet you money that there are people that would just walk over there and pick stuff up.
They walk
They're-
farther from their car to the store than they would from their house.
From their house to the store, right.
So I'm
And-
hearing kind of two things here. One, I'm hearing that we're not forcing people to walk, but we are forcing people to drive in some of our designs. And I'm also hearing some of our designs are actually creating environments that are in, so we cited heat as sort of a judging creature that lives here. So we can't walk very far, but isn't it interesting that when we create these sort of Costco-esque malls where we have to walk around, those are going to be even hotter than this walk right here is. I think that's very interesting. So, yes, sir.
I'd
please.
like to just
Yes.
say one thing about
Yes.
Scott used the word required, and I think for the next 2 hours, we ought to really keep that word right in the front of your head, because you can require somebody to do something, but you can't make them do it. and they always have the option of saying, I'll go somewhere else. So we have to be able to entice people. We have to be able to encourage them to buy into our community, to be a part of it, not just because they're being required to do something. Because even though they may sign up in the beginning with the requirements, by the time it comes time to go put the cement in the ground, they've worked their way out of half of it. So I
That
think
is for sure.
required is great,
Yep.
but enticed is a better word.
We want them
We
to
need
want
to
to
get
build
people to
it.
buy in to the ideas that we're espousing to try to make these kind of improvements to our town without having to use the word, you're required to do this, because their answer is going to be, I'll go somewhere else.
Well, and I think the goal that we have today is finding, there should be requirements. There absolutely should be, these are the things that are the non-negotiables. So those are the requirements. There are some that would be, hey, these would be really nice, and that's where you talk about inspiring people, and maybe even, leaning in with them financially on development agreements, on tax abatements, to help them do nicer things. And then there are things, I think, that are aspirational that you say, man, it'd be really cool if we could do this. And those are the things that's where you pull out all the stops.
I'd like to see the focus on, let's start by identifying the absolute
Non-negotiables.
must-dos,
Yep.
non-negotiables.
Okay, I'm gonna, before you
And then-
spoil the rest of our presentation, before you do the presentation yourself, you guys led us straight where we
We're on the
needed
same
you to
page, and
go.
I like that a lot.
We're on the same page, you've just read our mind.
Just did your
So,
transition.
you guys led us exactly where we needed you to take us, where we needed you to take yourselves. I'm gonna bop it over back to Matt now. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Glad to hear this terminology. And that's what we want to do today, is find out, like, what are the non-starters? What are the bare minimums that you want to see in a development agreement? This gives predictability to the people arriving to town so that they know what they're entering into, and you're setting the stage for what Castroville aspires to become through these non-starters. And then you have the ability to incentivize other elements as well that are above and beyond what you would want as your bare minimums. So we've started studying Castroville, and we've had a workshop with you all to extract some of these key details. And so we have some identifiers that we want to build upon and validate with you all about what the minimum standards are. And then we want to just make you all try and stay within the realm of the DNA of your real town, of what Castroville is. And this is what Castroville is. It is not a monoculture. It is an eclectic nature where they built with what they had. They used the topography that best made sense at the time that they were building. They built buildings in ways that celebrated the trees on the lot, that celebrated the topography on the lot, that was best used for the way that they were using their land. And this Castroville that you see is all housed within a very neat block structure with a wide variety of building patterns on this. So what this says to me is that the public space, the city leaders established a framework of a city grid, and they let the private market do what they wanted to on their land. And that's how this entire town was built. The lot sizes vary. Councilmember Mers sent in a report before. I read over it, and one of his points was, we have these minimum house sizes, yet this isn't a reflection of Castroville at all. We have a wide variety of lot sizes, wide variety of building types and building sizes. And furthermore, what we're finding is, just because the house is larger does not mean that the quality or the value is going to maintain that in perpetuity. What you may find is these little small houses oriented on the lot appropriately built with character, and that some don't have front porches, still have a higher value than some of the newer ones, and so much so that the buildings that you have in downtown have a higher value now than they ever did in the lifetime of their history. Whereas some new development that's coming in, the highest value it ever had was the day it was built, and it fell off because of the material and the type of construction that it led to, which is not fiscally sustainable when you're looking at your infrastructure dollars that you're investing as your tax dollars. When you think about maintaining these these places that are getting built and you look at it from a bank account perspective, you want the value that you're investing in tax dollars to generate wealth, long-term wealth. Your town has that in the core town. And you're starting to see these 3 cities, soon to be 5 cities, start to get divided out in a different context than what you have. We think this is extremely imperative because you don't have to be anywhere America, and you can write your standards around exactly what you're aspiring to do. And there's a real strategy in achieving these development agreements as well. And so we're going to get into that a little bit today as well. I'm so glad Councilmember Martinez called us out on those porches. I think we were remiss, and our own limitations were describing something that was not necessary. And what we found is a lot of the houses here don't have front porches. What they do have is similar characteristic, but they're not the same in architectural style. They are not the same in orientation. They don't have the same roof lines. But if you look at these buildings, you see these certain elements that scream Castroville. And it's something we really need some help, you know, and so sometimes our own preconceived information we have to unlearn with you sometimes and go back to really get back to the drawing board of finding out actually you don't need front porches to celebrate, and so though maybe that is not as critical, I do think that there are some elements of where the house and structure gets placed that is really important. We would need to really dive into that deeper to extract that. So thank you for that comment as well. We talked briefly about the 5 areas that we discovered within Castroville, and what we think is that Castroville is not one place. It's made up of a series of places with identifiable characteristics and identifiable boundaries of these places. Nature, you have natural places in Castroville. It's places you go in, you stare at the water, you go fishing, you have a fire, you sharpen your claws, and you go back to your house, right? It's like you're stroking your primal brain. Then you have places that are rural in nature. There's rural Castroville, and some people want to live this rural lifestyle, and so is that appropriate in Castroville's future? Should you and do you, and how might you protect and preserve those rural characteristics going forward so that that doesn't just get absorbed into the next level, which is like neighborhood residential. And your neighborhood residential is not 25-foot setbacks, 5-foot side yards, and 10-foot rear yards. That is not what your residential character looks like. It is a wide spectrum of building types, from duplexes to small houses to large estate houses on huge lots, houses that are brought right up to the street edge, houses that are pushed real far back. And again, they were building with the natural topography, building with their own trends, and we invite you all to really think about how that goes forward and not be overly prescriptive of where the lots go, but understanding the metrics that actually make them feel comfortable. And again, where do they fit? What we're trying to show is that different contexts fit in different places, and using these categories gives you a little bubbles or the ability to set some areas. And so you could map this out geographically of where these places are and start to write standards geographically appropriate to preserve or create different types of environments using these types of metrics. The next one is your core. It's a very urban street. You all have one of the most urban street frontages. And what we pointed out last time is you really celebrate these courtyards in the rear, and they all kind of interconnect, and they provide this great relief, and they're covered in trees, and they're just wonderful spaces. But your street edges are very, very urbane. They're pretty stark, and there's particularly in the downtown area. And so, you know, these are things that we should challenge ourselves to say, do we want that going forward? Do we want to soften these up with landscaping? Do we, you know, how might we think about what that looks like, not just in the downtown setting, but for new developments as they too build new retail centers and new places to gather? What does it look like and how does that function? And then you have highway commercial, which we, you know, you've got this Highway 90 that splits your grid and leaves these little remainder tracks. While TxDOT's a secondary entity that we've, you know, got to battle and you've got to deal with, there are ways of hopefully softening those. But even for new development, where the interface of that happens, the context that the development standards need to be supportive of that. You don't want a, you know, a building that's out of context with its place because it will fail. And then you're setting up the end user for failure by requiring, a 0-foot setback on Highway 90 with a tiny little sign, and that may not be the right context. So we really want to try and be context sensitive when we're going through this. The other thing is, there are a wide variety of development patterns out there that may be appropriate for Castroville. And what if you all started to integrate, these different development patterns where the developers could pick what they wanted to do? And here's, 3 different types. This is traditional neighborhood development. This is what you have now. This is a small block grid, a wide variety of place types or character areas within those places that you could just establish your block structure and, again, let the private market do what it does on the internal lots. We always say that cities don't get do-overs easy, but in the private market, it's a lot easier to do remodel of buildings and redevelopment on private parcels, but it's hard to go back and rebuild city infrastructure. So if you get a bunch of dead-end cul-de-sacs and loops and lollipops and those types of things, it's very hard to retrofit those over having the right public framework on the start. Another type that we've seen is village center, and it's where the buildings are connected. They front into plazas or courtyards, and the vehicular traffic just goes on the peripheral. And so you basically flip-flop the way that you're doing it currently, and you instead of having parking lots, you front them on courtyards, and the parking lots go on the peripheral, and it creates these linear little neighborhoods. And so there's some examples and some illustrative drawings that kind of articulate that. And then clustered land development. This is one that lets you actually preserve more land, and you cluster the houses in a smaller lot dimensions, and it allows them to have greens. You can put them into pocket neighborhoods, which is where they would actually front on central greens. And so we're just tossing these out as it may be very easy to write in your development agreements that you have development patterns that are pre-approved, and they can come and pick. And it sets them up with a stage where they can kind of select what fits best with their model without trying to box them in. So we just wanted to get that on your minds ahead of time before we start getting into the details of the development process. But again, Castroville is an eclectic place, and it's got identifiable characteristic. It is not this. And y'all don't have much of this. And right now your ordinances require this. And you can get what you ask for. So if someone comes to town and submits a plat to Brianna that meets the minimum standards of Castroville, she can't deny it, and it's going to be statutorily approved, and they're going to go on down the road.
But there are sidewalks on both sides of the street.
Thanks, Scott. Look at those lovely sidewalks on both sides of the street.
I don't know, actually, I don't know that they're there.
I don't either. I think there may be, but so and same with your retail places. If you require and build street types like this, then you're going to tell the development community that you need high signage, that you want the cars going fast, that you want the building set back really far, that you want continuous curb cuts. And so your street environment informs your built environment too from the developer perspective. So having the right street classifications and street types matching to your character areas is really important. That sets the scale and the infrastructure availability so that your tax dollars for your streets can actually pay for the development happening around it. For example, you don't want an expensive street like this in a rural area because the development patterns of the rural nature will never pay for the infrastructure that you're using to install right in front of it. You'd be upside down on your investment, if you will.
I want to say this, because this is something you might hear. I'm still getting input from the likes of, and I don't mind naming people because I think it's important for context, and I'm not calling people out or making fun of them, et cetera. But I did get a feedback from Terry Dickerson recently. He was asking for just an update. He's trying to sell his land to the developer, wants to know where we are on the development agreement process. And while he had my ear for all of like 3 minutes, within a 3-minute segment, he managed to make sure I was aware that he still thinks that this whole gridded street idea is going to increase the cost of our infrastructure and increase what the city's going to have to maintain. And that's stuff that I hope that as we have this conversation today, we can, you can arm us with an informed and intelligent response to those types of issues, because I'll be honest, I don't have a way of saying that other than I'm pretty sure that's not the case. And I think part of it is the value. So as we put these types of standards in place, and I think you and I talked about this on some level, Matt, it is true that if all you did was require the block breaks and the shorter blocks, that the net would be an increase in cost of infrastructure. But this is intended, and this is the thing that we have to convey to developers, and this is where it's going to get tricky as you all start to develop this policy today, and that is the goal. We need to get to a policy today, please, for the love of God, is that there's going to need to be a kind of a delineation between here's what is required and allowed by right, which you're going to get into, and here's what we'd really like to see, and we need to be able to help. We need to understand and be able to help our partners, our development partners, understand that the real value comes from instituting the entire plan. If all you do is say the minimum requirement, then at the end of the day, it actually may end up where the infrastructure is more expensive than it would be otherwise, and you're burdening the city on some level because you haven't built the neighborhood. You've built a subdivision instead of a neighborhood.
I'm sure that he was just looking at the linear footage of streets
I think
compared to the...
See, now you're going to ask me to disparage him, and
No, I'm just
I
saying
think you're giving him too much credit, but that's okay. All right.
Well, something else that people,
I've dealt with engineers and designs, I know what this is.
He's not an engineer.
I know, but he's a builder,
He's a great guy.
he's a developer.
That's what he is. He's a great
well, so
guy.
the other thing that I know he does value, and I know that other people value, is landscaping. Landscaping always costs more to put in than not to put in. But why do you do it? It's the single most valuable thing that you can do to your, like everybody that's going to go sell their property, suddenly they landscape the crud out of it, and it's worth percentage points more than it would have been otherwise. It's the whole design, to your point.
And I think this is really good, because again, Terry could be right if you don't modify your street standards to actually match what you're trying to accomplish. So agreed. I think all of those are really good points. So today, the main elements we're going to be talking about are the purpose of development agreements versus UDOs, the types of development agreements, development agreement policy, and then the cost of development agreements, which we just want some input on. So the purpose of development agreements, and this is what we are, if I was writing your policy, this is what I would put in. This is the purpose. The purpose of it is to determine if the city wishes to enter into a binding contract with the landowner to come up with a plan for the development. That's essentially all that says. You can read it, but and what that does is it's a binding negotiation between the entity that's going to be serving the public infrastructure and the landowner or developer that is intending on building the lots and the development to support the infrastructure. And so just want to validate, is there anything missing, overstated, wrong into this statement? I think this is going to probably go verbatim into the policy we recommend.
I'd have to have time to think about it, but I would say, do you guys mind if I take a crack at it? All right. So, the development agreement specifically is to handle the standards, the aspirational standards that are not allowed by law to mandate. They are to say, these are the things that we feel are going to enhance the quality of life in Castroville, and be willing, and the development agreement is a mechanism that allows us to do a negotiation, a binding negotiation with developers so that we invest in our future. We provide monetary benefit for them creating long-term quality of life value.
Okay. I think this captures everything that you've said. I really think it does.
Okay.
It talks about the different standards you can negotiate and the reason why you'd want to do it. And we'll give you times to sort through this, and we'll give you drafts. But I just wanted to see, that's the main intent. This is, we did a lot of research just in other communities to see what their development agreement policies talked about. And a lot of them come back to the same kind of terminology. We tried to really build this around Castroville, but I think that this should be that snapshot. And we can build in some aspirational language too to achieve higher standards. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about development agreements versus the Unified Development Ordinance. Sorry, I can't see my. Development agreements are negotiated between the landowner and the or developer and the public agency for the extraterritorial jurisdiction. In the state of Texas, you cannot use development agreements inside the city limits. They're only for properties outside of the city limits and being your extraterritorial jurisdiction. There's a wide variety of development agreement types as well, which we'll go over. They're negotiated, and it allows you to establish land uses, development intensities, development standards, environmental standards, public infrastructure, other development-related elements, signage, those types of things you can write into your development agreement. And it's a planning tool that allows greater latitude than just having your standard ordinances under your subdivision or environmental rules, which are what govern your extraterritorial jurisdiction or your ETJ. So in the ETJ, you don't have zoning. In the state of Texas, we don't have zoning outside of the city limits. You have environmental standards you can use, and you have subdivision standards and sign standards. Those are the standards within the UDO that are covered outside of the city limits in the ETJ in the same geography where development agreements can apply. They can create by right components, or they may include financial incentives. And we're going to get to that today. What is it that you would like to see? It establishes timelines for services when you are anticipating on having the water, wastewater, and electricity lines to the site. And it establishes annexation when they may be entering into the city limits with the development schedule takedown, so that you know that your infrastructure is going to be online and actually utilized when you deliver it. You don't want to get that sequence out of whack, otherwise you've got carry costs for no reason and no one flowing through the lines. And then city benefits include, you can negotiate community amenity centers, public infrastructure, achieve higher development standards, even end users, and those types of things. If you wanted a event center, those types of end users are also negotiable into development agreements. The landowner benefits include regulatory predictability. They've got a document that it's called Chapter 245 rights under the local government code. You often hear it called grandfathering. A development agreement is a permit and a series of permits. It vests with that property and it carries forward with that property, even if there's, well, actually that's not true. And if you can make it assignable or not. That's actually one of the things that you can write into your development agreements. And then, again, they get a deferral of annexation until their project comes online, so they're not paying city taxes on land that still has cows on it, type of thing. They also get public infrastructure and negotiated standards that let them do different, basically. And so it's the availability to do different for the developers. UDOs are combined development regulations. A UDO is basically a unified series of ordinances. It's giving your zoning ordinance and your subdivision ordinance, your sign standards, some environmental standards, and putting it in one document. Rather than the developer coming to town and having to go to the subdivision ordinance to find their rules, the zoning ordinance, the sign ordinance. And what happens when you do that, when they're in standalone documents, a lot of times they'll get modified along the way, and no one went to cross-reference to see if they didn't create conflicts. And so UDOs help reduce conflict. It's more predictable. It's easier to read. All your standards are in one place, and so it's a lot easier from that context. They contain UDOs work within the city limits and the ETJ, so it's both geographies that would be regulated under this. However, zoning is only accomplished in the city limits. UDOs are by right standards. It means that they come in and they meet your minimum standards, you statutorily can't deny them. Whereas development agreements are negotiable and you can establish those standards. Really quickly, are there any questions on the differences between those two sets of regulations? Nope, okay, cool. All right, types of development agreements. I think there's a real opportunity for Castroville. When I was the Director of Development Services in Hutto, Texas, Austin was doing a big annexation, and none of the landowners out there wanted to be part of Austin. We got cowboy boots on, and we set up meetings with all of these landowners out there, and we went out and offered non-development agreements. And these non-development agreements said, you'll remain in ETJ status. We won't annex you for 25 years. You can keep doing what you're doing. We're not taking your agricultural or timber exemptions. All of that stays intact. But if you sign this agreement, it allows the city to have continuity of land where you can annex off of those development agreements. It provides the ability to know what happens on those lands, and so the non-development agreements would let you actually say, if they start development, it sends them into a development agreement. And it's a very wonderful tool. When we did this in Hutto, we got about 52 property owners all to voluntarily come in. And it created ETJ management where we were now working with the cities around us. We knew what land areas we were going to be planning infrastructure on. I think that tool could be very good for you guys. This is called a non-development agreement or a Chapter 43 development agreement. Yes,
So
sir.
what was the benefit to the landowners in doing that?
They get guaranteed ETJ status. They get to keep doing their uses, and they got deflated a little bit when the annexation laws changed this last legislative session. Prior to this last legislative session, you all could go and annex anyone you wanted to. Now that's gone. They left this provision in Chapter 43, though, and so some landowners, may not see the benefits, but what it does do is it guarantees them ETJ status for a longer time period, and it allows them to do a negotiation at the time that they do get annexed.
Where this would be beneficial for us, and really the only place we'd probably use it as a general law city is in those deals where you're talking about trying to create continuity. So if we have a place that wants to voluntarily annex in and there's a large landowner between us and them, we might get them to sign an agreement like this, which would effectively extend our ETJ through that property and create the continuity that you would need to allow for the voluntary annexation. That's really the only place I see us utilizing this because of the recent law changes.
Well, and I understand the benefit to the city in being able to do that if you need that continuity. But I'm looking.
Landowners don't see a lot of benefit.
No.
Really, this was a way.
Well, back
for
then they did, right?
Yeah.
Because there was involuntary annexation, and basically Austin just said, we'll waive that, but we don't have that anymore, so it is not a benefit to them.
That's right.
Okay.
So did I hear you correctly say that once they sign the non-development agreement, that it's really up to the landowner who starts a planning project that then triggers a development agreement with them? So-
Yes, that's correct.
So that's fantastic, I think.
Yeah.
It really is.
So it doesn't limit what they can do.
If they never do anything, it stays right where it is.
That's exactly right. And so that, too, could be seen as a benefit. It may not be a bad approach. It also would let you actually secure your boundaries. If you know that you've got big landowners and you want to establish your permanent extraterritorial boundaries of like, man, we don't want to go past this point, then you could start to set that up and work with those landowners and get it on their radar that the city is like, this is our 50-year plan, but we want to have it as a known thing. So
You've established it by contractual agreement.
that's right.
So
What's the maximum length of that term?
So I've read two things. One legal interpretation came back at 45 years. One said that it was 25 years with expandable, you can do another 25 years. So 50 years is about the length.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
I wanted to get that on your radar as a potential tool. I think that it's possible.
Wait, I want to ask, I'm sorry, one more thing, if you know this. So if you do a non-development agreement, it's not, it is if you don't develop, then whatever. If you reach the end of that term, it doesn't necessarily, they don't necessarily have to annex in at that point.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it will not, it won't like trigger annexation. There are times, the ones we wrote previously, we said if you didn't do anything in 25 years, it allows the city to move forward with annexation. But when you're moving forward with annexation, you have to go through the annexation, it's a 3-year map process, so it's actually a 3-year procedure in order to accomplish this. You would have to add them into your municipal annexation plan, you write a service plan, and then you have it in a 3-year map. So everyone gets a notification at that time if that 25 years or 50-year period expired.
And in that 25 years, it's highly expected around here that we will quit being a general law city, and that option would be available, but they would be insulated for that period of time.
Well, no, there still is not that option. There still is not, like, the city cannot involuntarily annex a property.
Well, in 25 years, we might.
Not even
Oh, not
right now.
anymore, not anymore, that's
Not-
right.
yeah,
The
not
legislation
anymore.
changed, okay.
Right.
But it's possible it may change back. I don't know. Maybe not going back the other direction. I don't know. But it's a really good tool, and you can use this as a general law city. This is an applicable tool for general law cities.
I
So,
agree.
just wanted to get that on your radars
Yeah.
for ETJ management. It's a very
Thank you.
good. The next type is by right development agreements, and this is what we want to get with you all today, is really set this up. What are the minimum standards that you'd like to see so that when a developer comes to town, you say, here are our by right development standards, here are bare minimums for a development agreement. This is a straight deal. This is not incentivized. You're just negotiating a development agreement where they get additional standards that they need or allowances, and you all get the clarity and predictability that you were looking for as well. That's what we're going to hopefully get to today. And then you've got what are called Chapter 380 development agreements. This is where you can leverage ad valorem taxes, or you can pay for services if you wanted bigger plazas or sidewalks or whatever. You can determine what incentives would go along with your development agreement, and you can set up performance metrics within those development agreements to get hit. One of my favorite examples of this was the city of Buda. They set up a Chapter 380 development agreement with the Cabela's over there, and Cabela's failed to meet their employment standards under the development agreement, and they didn't get their money because it was a violation of the development agreement because they didn't have a number of employees. So it really is down to that level of specificity if you want to get to that level. Again, these are the types of things that the council has the will to negotiate. But your negotiations do kind of bind the hands of future councils because these development agreements are Chapter 245 righted, and so they're grandfathered. So just being mindful of those elements that you do include. Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of this. I just wanted to set up those 3 standards of how you can do development agreements. And so we've had conversations on this in our previous workshop, which we'd like to go over with you all as well. You know, what are the minimum standards to achieve a development agreement in Castroville? This is to the council now. We need to hear. What we took away previously were these items, and some of these items we need to even add some additional standards to. I didn't want to change what was in the report, so this is a snapshot from the report. But you know, on the next page we have something about garages being recessed, and your city manager came up with a good alternative. It could be included, which is like a J-swing garage or like a side entry kind of garage, which may still accomplish the same standards that you would like to hit. And then from the city council workshops, you know, what should be you know, included, what should be incentivized. And if we want to go through line by line and, like, you know, y'all vote yes incentive, no by right, that would be fine. However you all feel is the most effective way to do this, we're here to just help facilitate that. Do you have anything?
No, you're good.
Okay, I know Scott was going to jump in on me.
One thing I would ask of you is, the reason that we began this process of education is because we still are not city planners. So as we go through this, before we start voting on things, I want to make sure that we're discussing the reason why we would, making sure that we've got it in context with the different options and the implications of each one. I think that without that guidance, we're not utilizing the full glory of your experience.
And I think that's great. Yes, sir. We will definitely try and do that. One of the things I would invite you all to do is not to be too prescriptive in your development agreements and use your charrette process to allow the creativity to flow in that. And then coming out of the charrette process, you would be brought a plan, and then you could determine those standards of, yes, we entered into it. Now we've got an understanding of what the development community is trying to accomplish. We know what the city's trying to accomplish. And so not to be overly prescriptive in the development agreements, just as a recommendation. But again, these are your policies, so we're here to help you administrate. We can walk through, Mayor, of some of the good and the bad and the trade-offs that come along with these things. When we're talking about building cities, it is a series of trade-offs. There's not a silver bullet. There's not a pure way of doing it that's a win-win for everyone all the time. So we need to evaluate the trade-offs. Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry, I was stretching.
Oh,
We're throwing you off, we're keeping you on your toes.
As we go through this, one thing I want to accomplish out of this is to be very clear to developers that are coming in, because we really do have people that care about this. I don't think that there's a single developer that's come out here that has said, I want to do what I want to do and I don't care what you want. And they have in minor instances, but mostly they want to do what's good for the city, mostly. So what I'm a little bit concerned about is if we mandate this charrette process, which is an additional overhead for them, they've already got all these different expenses. What does that look like? How does that benefit the city without putting undue burden on the developers?
That's a great question. And maybe there are 2 or 3 types that you adopt. Maybe you have one that's a standard deal, and these are then things you must include in the development agreement. There's no charrette necessary, but you've got to hit these elements. The next one could be, we're willing to facilitate a charrette, and it's more flexible. The predictability is, the flexibility is greater, and we'll negotiate the terms, and the outcomes would be through the charrette. The third would be incentivized with the charrette, where it's like, you get all of the clarity and the predictability, and all of the standards are very clearly defined, and everything is in the development agreement. So those could be your 3 types that you offer up as development agreements. I think that's a really good idea, Mayor.
Okay. We just need to make sure that we understand exactly what the cost to the developer is going to be. Well, not exactly, but at least a rough estimation of what it's going to be.
How it impacts, yeah.
How it impacts them, because whatever impacts them impacts the people that are going to live there, and we represent them too.
Right, absolutely.
Okay.
And so that is the last item on the agenda, and we did a snapshot of what you have now, and then we can talk about what other communities do as well.
I just want to point out that we're talking about developers at 2 scales for your city, right? We have a developer who's going to come in and sort of do the run-of-the-mill kind of everyday things that we always see them do. Those guys are going to be in E2J. That's who you are targeting development agreements for.
Yes.
They come in, that's a company, that's a corporation. In terms of their pocketbook, they can handle this. I think your concern is very valid when it comes to more incremental level developers. Those are the folks, like individuals who come in, maybe they do $6 at most.
No, I think it's
we need to consider
both.
sides of this coin, that we will eventually be making this process with your UDO or all scales of your developers. But right now, we're really looking at those big guys that are going to come in with lawyers and dollars and a lot of things. So we want to set you up to talk to them primarily.
And that's where I've gotten some of the concern is from them, is saying, we're investing all the rest of this money, so we're adding one more cost on top of it. And if there's a benefit, I don't personally have an issue with that, as long as there's some kind of, if there's good, solid reasoning behind it, if we are very methodical about this and are doing it on purpose, then that's for a specific reason, not just to be a pain and make things difficult on them.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's a good point. And having the development agreement policy is going to set the stage for them that they know they're going to have to do different than their conventional right from the get-go, and so that should hopefully help facilitate that conversation to where they feel like, oh, we can go do this, we know what you want, we're going to go draft our development plan, versus, hey, we don't quite know how to do this, we'd love to work with you all, let's work together. And it's both teams come to the table, and you sit around and it's a collaborative process, but the outputs of those are usually really good, versus y'all are willing to throw money at it, and then you really should get what you want. So I think those are kind of the 3 elements.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Cool.
So I was just going to suggest, instead of just like voting yes or like no required incentive on each individual item, I think sort of prioritizing like a list of which things we think are sort of a whole list, because then you have a certain amount that is required. If they won't get at least this far down the list, then we're not interested.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of a sliding scale of how much money we have at the time to get them further down the list.
And I think it's a combination of those, yeah. I think that's a good approach. All right.
That's great. So let's start with the the blocks, your block structure. Your town was laid out in a 330 by 330 foot grid, and 60 feet of right of way of in between each of the blocks.
42 feet of right-of-way.
Oh, 42 feet. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's correct. And you all heard from your
15.
yeah, you heard from the from your ISD, from your ESD, and one other person who was, and TxDOT, that this was something that all of them supported because of the connectivity issues And we too believe that this is one of the most critical components. And you can write into your development agreement policies that there's flexibility for pedestrian block breaks, for alternative shape blocks. It doesn't have to be the prescriptive 330, but you could establish some standards if that was, at the will of the council. So that's the first item that we would rate it as a 10, if we're doing a 1 to 10 metrics.
Well, I think that's good context. I told you before, I think that it's imperative that you give us the value of your experience, and if we want to debate that, then council has the ability to do that, but
Yes, sir.
definitely with your guidance. So, we're talking about minimum. I think that aspirationally, we would want it the 330 feet. So what is your thought about the 330-foot existing blocks versus a 690 with the 330 pedestrian?
I'm going to say it depends on the context of place. In a rural setting, having those larger blocks makes a lot of sense. If you could do a right-of-way reservation where later when the demand, the population demand or growth is happening at a rapid rate and it needs to develop that rural land into a more urban place, that you could build it in that context. So I think that having larger block reservations for different place or different character areas could be really appropriate.
So what you're saying is you still do the 330 feet and only require them to pave for the 690?
And, that's there's a wide variety of ways of handling that. You could say that they don't have to pave other than to the last lot that they build, pave it as you go. Seaside, Florida was built in that way. They had shell that they claimed from there, and they incrementally built out their infrastructure so that it wasn't this big takedown and it wasn't this expensive public investment. It was small scale. And so, there's a wide variety of ways of doing this, and you could set that. And so maybe there's standards that you put in place that says, if this, then this, if you don't do this, then this. I mean, that's a possibility. But yes, so if you did the 690s or with the right-of-way, it'd be 720. Is this right? Yeah.
I think it was the 690 because it was 330 with 30 in the middle.
Yeah.
And that we don't want to, it can't be too rigid with that because that doesn't fit every property. I mean, there are certain tracts of land, somebody may come in with a smaller development and not be able to accommodate that design ethic or goal. But,
Oftentimes we write if there's topographic, physical barriers or alternative reasons why the grid should be broken, then it should be a justifiable allowance.
And that happened in downtown here. Around the edge we have little slivers and match up to the surrounding roads.
So I think that the number, though, is, if we're doing a block length, it's 330 plus 330, so that's 660 plus 42,
which is
right?
maybe a 400 or 402, yeah.
702?
I'm sorry, 702, yeah.
Okay.
If you're going to go with that, maintain that 42-foot reserve between, or in the middle of that block, yeah.
Okay. And what we didn't have on here was, transportation cul-de-sacs. What are requirements on cul-de-sacs? No cul-de-sacs?
Sometimes it's unavoidable.
Unless the topography lends itself to that. But no unnatural cul-de-sacs in the middle of where they don't need to be.
Where the grid can be applied, the grid should be applied.
Yeah. Agreed?
Yes.
So I think that on number one, I like the idea of doing a 702-foot block length, max block length, with the 42-foot set. I don't know how you'd phrase that. So every 330 feet, you have 42 feet of right-of-way on the grid, and every other one would need to be paved. You don't have to pave the one in the middle.
You just have to dedicate it.
You just have to dedicate it, right? Yes, sir. Okay. So, are we in agreement on that? Anybody opposed to that?
I'm a little confused.
Yes.
330 feet by 330 feet is the typical city block now.
Yeah,
1,200 square feet per block.
12.
So are we saying that we want to maintain that as a minimum size? Because generally, we're getting extreme pushback from almost every developer who says America's not buying that anymore.
I don't think that the lot size is being determined by that so much as the block size. In other words, because we have a variety of different development arrangements that we're looking at. As he said earlier, we could look at the village center arrangement or the cluster arrangement. Those things can all be applied to that grid. So you could have zero frontages with multifamily and commercial. You could have various arrangements.
So you're not
with residential.
mandating 8 blocks,
8 lots.
I mean, eight lots on the
No,
lot.
I don't feel
No.
that way.
You're
No, this-
mandating a block size.
Yeah.
It's a block size, so it's establishing the grid so that we have interconnectivity,
Okay, I
right?
understand.
And no dead ends. So,
Well,
It's possible.
well, it's no,
We dead end at the river a lot around here.
you don't dead end into the, you got to go across bridges across all the rivers. Yeah, I don't really want that where I am. I think that it is this, but also there's no, where possible, where geography allows, the grid extends and they have to connect with any pre-existing grids or any pre-existing connections. So making sure that it's not looked at as just this development, it's looking at this portion of the city as it starts to interconnect to the rest of the city.
The other thing that this does is, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am.
I just don't really see the city grid expanding anywhere because we're surrounded by cemeteries and canal and the river. So I don't know.
I'm talking about
But
future,
we'll be
future
starting
growth.
a grid
East.
on the
Yeah,
east side.
yeah, but if you, okay, so you would really like to reflect and associate that grid to the city grid even outside, across the river.
Right.
Okay.
The other thing that we've got to include in here somehow is, how do you deal with street types? Because, like, if I think about the grid inside of where we are, it's more effective because you can get from that to, for example, you can get from that to Lower Lacoste. So it's a little bit more of a thoroughfare kind of like.
Constantinople, you mean?
Well, as you go over Constantinople to Lower Lacoste, where there's fewer, like you go past the airport right now, or if you go toward Lacoste, or if you get out onto Highway 90. So there are places where you go from the grid to think about it as through traffic versus local traffic. But I think that we need to include some measure of through traffic to get them to the main thoroughfares. How do you do that?
You can set up your street types by development intensities. And so in a more urban setting, you can widen those out and have a larger street type. And so what you're doing is setting the 42 feet as minimum, you know, and maybe you have an 80-foot section for a more urban street section, and you can prescribe that. So, I mean, we could write street standards for your development agreement if that's something that you wanted to have as like, you know, based on these intensities, so this intensity would be these street types, and you could set that hierarchical street type to your, to those elements.
Well, I think that our thoroughfare plan ends up defining that.
Yeah,
And you can't do the thoroughfare plan before you know, because like, if you think about what one group did was they bought a whole bunch of different sections, so you don't know, like, are you gonna master plan the entire east side all the way up to Petranco? And no, we're not. So I think that as we continue that thoughtful thoroughfare planning, that it defines that. The other thing that we've got to include in here, I'm just trying to think of all the corners and edges here. The other thing that we've got to include here is you have the grid until it reaches the thoroughfare. And so we don't want the gridded going out onto the thoroughfare.
We don't want to recreate the Highway 90.
Yeah. So how do we avoid that?
Well, what you said earlier, you know, perpetuate that grid, and I think you mean to continue an alignment with it. But that may not always work, especially if you were to look at well, actually, McDonald Lacoste Road pretty much parallels the grid, but you would really want to address the existing thoroughfare and build from it rather than try to force something into it to fit it, so.
Well, the point is not putting too many entrances onto something that needs to have, there needs to be streets that carry traffic. For when people, because like Herb said, this traffic, cars are a reality. We live in a world that has cars. And we use our cars. Don't like to be forced to use them, but when we want to make sure that we're doing it safely and efficiently. And so I think that we just need to be careful about that wording to make sure that they understand that where there is no thoroughfare, there must be connectivity unless there's a thoroughfare or river or some other geographical element. Unless there's one of those elements, then it needs to follow this.
And at one of those elements, maybe every 2 or 3 streets continues on to actually, either 3 or 4.
I think at that point,
Whatever it is.
that is where you do need that direct interaction, and that would be through just any connection to a whatever, I don't know what you call it,
An existing thoroughfare, an existing route or a trunk,
an existing geographical element,
or those,
Yes.
yeah.
which would be drainage or street or river or whatever.
Railroad
Those would
tracks,
be listed as
physical barriers,
constraining.
blocking elements.
Oh,
Constraining.
blocking, yeah, constraining elements.
Constraining features, yes.
Constraining, I like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Does this grid infer that everything has to be straight? Are we talking about creating a grid pattern that must be straight streets?
Unless the geography doesn't allow that, yes.
Just
I
look
think-
at
I think
Alsatian
that- I
Oaks.
think that we're-
When we started, at the very beginning, they were all straight streets. 52 iterations later, there's no straight streets.
Right.
So why are we going to start with something that probably isn't going to end up at the end being what the developer's going to do because they can't sell it?
This is based on the time that we've spent with city planners, with transportation planners, with TxDOT, with all of the different people that they do transportation for a living. They say this is the most effective way to carry traffic safely and efficiently. Which also provides for other modes of transportation, biking, walking, whatever. So it is multimodal transportation. Instead of having what he had shown before, loops and lollipops, where you've got all these.
Well, I agree
cul-de-sacs
with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm not disputing that at all. But you can still have a variety of different types of streets. You can have collector streets. You can have those streets. They don't necessarily have to be straight.
So if someone had a
That's the only point I'm
trapezoidal
kinda hung
tract, if
up
somebody had a trapezoidal tract of land, they could come in and make a center block that was maybe trapezoidal, as long as it matched the dimensional limitations that we were prescribing.
Or like in the horseshoe, or even over in the new MP homes, you have your gridded blocks, and then at the ends you extend them out, and somebody gets a big lot with a big backyard.
Right.
And there are different ways, as you're saying, to create different block structures where they don't have to be straight. Charleston, South Carolina, if you go to Charleston, your eye terminates every 350 feet. They kink their streets. Their blocks actually are kinky. They are sideways every other block, just slightly twisted. And so what it does is it creates a terminal view, so your eye actually terminates into a building, and so everything looks close. People walk further in Charleston than they do most American cities because your eyes are getting tricked over and over.
Let
just
the
by
record
breaking those
reflect
blocks
that,
up.
let the record reflect that Matt recommends kinky blocks.
Kinky blocks.
Be clear about that.
Okay, well,
I think
It's going to be challenging to.
the other thing to be aware of is, I mean, there's, the topography determines some of this. You've got floodplains and other issues, and in the current developments we're looking at, they're outside the city, a lot of the way their lot layouts are being determined is due to topography and drainage and that kind of thing. Now, they're still using conventional tools to apply to that, but there is topography that's shaping it.
Well, I think that what,
Blocks.
yeah, I think that Herb's point with that is it doesn't have to be a checkerboard. Yeah. But it could be offset checkerboards, which would create these views.
But
we
you
don't have a
maintain
check-
the requirements for the space.
Yeah.
You give them the options of what they do with
Visual
the
elements,
space.
yeah.
And you use the optimal solution for the types of streets to
Yep.
give you the best flow and sidewalks.
You had a recommendation?
Yeah, and so that can be a minimum standard of having these gridded streets, but through incentives, what we're talking about in perspective building and shifting the street orientation, these are almost design elements that enhance the experience of the development. But the mere standard in terms of safety, in terms of transportation networking, in terms of infrastructure, follows this pattern that then you can elaborate on, you can embellish, you can allow the developer, in cooperation with y'all, to create more creative iterations that can have more organic styles, more village-based styles. There's a lot of incentives that then y'all can write in that then it makes sense. There's the buy-in, like we said, to want to create something that a developer would want to sell outside of just a typical gridded street. So I do hear your point in that there's a reason that certain cities are celebrated, even though they all have the same gridded function, but it's because they take the same basic format and they add a design element that enhances it beyond just the grid.
So through the UDO then, is this where we would put examples of possible iterations?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and so when the UDO comes online, you can write all these crazy block standards that really are flexible. And you may want to leave it flexible in this that allows these development agreements to have different block types using this mathematical breakdown. So that's a great way.
So I think that we've got the block, I think that we're okay with the block standards. We would have to develop the block types, but that happens through the UDO. We just need to make sure that we accomplish that. Am I misstating that, anybody? Okay. And then, are we okay to move beyond this item? I kind of like going through item by item.
I'm still lost on the 690. And you said 742. right?
702.
What is that? How do you get to that?
So that it's 330 plus 330, that's 660.
Right.
And a 42-foot.
Reserve,
In the middle between them?
Yeah.
Or on the
in between them.
In between them?
Yeah, so that there's a vehicular, a non-vehicular traffic lane there, if not a vehicular
So you'd have
traffic
4
lane.
blocks, and then you'd have a right-of-way, but
Okay.
they wouldn't have to develop it.
Okay.
They have to set it aside so you can still use it. You could put sidewalks there, you could leave it just open.
I want to be sure that we're not just too rigid, because, for instance, I had a guy come into my office last week. He has 130 acres of land. It's just wide enough to put a lot on each side of a central street. So his plan was to shoot a street right down the middle of it. And we put together a plan that didn't make a straight street. We meandered that street down the middle of it. So you didn't pull into the subdivision and look at a half mile of asphalt. And he was receptive to that, but he could never do what we're trying to do, because he just didn't have the space. And so we have to have a relief valve there somewhere.
Sure.
Where
Well-
somebody that just can't do this has still an opportunity to see a development come into the city. That's all.
So what I've done in my work tremendously is global standardization, and I know that you've done this as well. Part of this, I believe most of us have. You can't have a standard without having an exception process. So we're setting the standard, we're allowing for an exception process, but that would be like with MP Homes, we did something very similar to that.
Right.
We would just want to get further in front of it so that we could deal with these more methodically, and that would happen through a charrette process. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
Good, okay. So that employs the charrette process, yes.
Right. The one-offs, the exceptions, you don't have to do it for 100% of all situations. You do it for, the 90%, and then the 10% have to be one-offs or 10-offs. Okay, so the next one, we talked about reducing the width of the driveways. Can we talk through the purpose for this and what the alternatives would be to allow them to accomplish that?
Reducing the driveway widths?
Right.
So what this does is when you're going down a street, instead of having large curb cuts that make you constantly look over, it breaks up the definition of space. If you look in most of your streets out here, you don't have a bunch of curb cuts. They're all located on the sides or the rear, or they're out front. And so it creates constant interruptions between the public and private realm, and the space gets lost. So that you start to privatize stuff that should be in a public space. And so narrowing up the driveways just reduces the conflict points. It also makes it to where, in the city of Taylor, they're doing it purely based off of the financials. They're saying the longer these are, the more wasted space that they're having for water, wastewater line, and it's not creating the yield that they wanted with their return on investment for tax dollars. So there's a fiscal element of it as well, and physical.
My understanding was that it was the reason to reduce the driveway widths, and it's not forcing, like, it's not a single straight driveway where you got to park one and back the other one. That would be terrible. But it's creating these abilities. I guess the exception to this would be the alley loaded. So you still have a single, like, you could achieve a single driveway with an alley loaded design, because you basically go directly into your garage, or you have a little sliver of driveway there. If it's in the front, then you create there's a name for it, a J-swing, right? Thank you. See, you do this for a living or something. Where it goes back and the driveway is back behind the house. And it takes away the prominence of garage doors, right. And so what you'll do with this is you'll put the garage doors in the back in the alleys, or you'll put them around the side so that you're not looking at a row of garage doors going down the street.
I think that's a great idea.
Great idea.
I've just seen the
What
bad
is-
side of the alleys and having the garages in back, because look at the Northeast. That's what the Northeast is like. And it's a nightmare.
Mhm.
It really is. It is a nightmare for traveling. I mean, Newport, Rhode Island, I was going nuts again when we had to go up there for our son's graduation. I remembered why we don't live in the Northeast. It's that nightmare. And so I like be able to have my vehicles beside each other in the driveway. You know, it's nice. The garage right there pulling into it. I've lived on that side of it. So yeah, you may see it as nice until you actually have to drive it and make sure that there's no blind areas to pulling out into the alleys and stuff.
Well, this is not, so this would be, what I heard discussed was alternative to an alley design would be J-swing or recessed garage.
Yeah.
So putting the garage behind the front facade of the house, so you can pull straight in still, or a J-swing if the lot is wide enough and allows for it. There's no alley, it's just a J-swing, so the driveway runs along the side of the house and you pull in the back.
Yeah, I've seen nightmares though for it.
With a
Just-
J-swing?
But yeah,
How? Where?
okay, think of
Why?
a lot of these dually trucks.
Uh-huh.
It's not that easy to swing,
Right.
and
What
there's
is-
not much room.
What is the width where, do we specify a maximum width? Is that what we're saying?
What's a typical driveway? It's 22 feet?
22.
I know they had a,
24 is like a
in that,
commercial.
so in that, in the present, so in the Country Village, in the new homes, I don't know who all got a chance to go drive that, but they had all these cars demoed during that event.
The
that were out in
expensive
the
sports
parking lot.
cars, yeah.
So, at least a couple of those have J-swing garages, where the garage, the way the house is situated, the house is here, the garage is here, and the J-swing, so the first thing you pull into is the garage, but you didn't see, the doors don't face the street, they face towards the side.
Yeah, well, we got that one in River Bluff that has the J-swing. And the guy constantly having problems, he's having to back his vehicle up there to get in there in order to get out safely to, it's.
I'm just saying, they had big vehicles,
Yeah.
like on one of them specifically, one of them, they had a big vehicle, it's like the second or third one in
Yeah.
on the right.
It's just, I've seen the bad side of it one too
Right.
many times. So, and being down here in South Texas with the pickup trucks with their jacked up and everything like that, and
They'll fit in the garage.
it won't fit very well.
Well, it
is what
doesn't
I'm
fit in the
saying.
garage either.
Yeah, oh, I know, but I'm just saying,
There are quite a few J-swings in Country Village, like the already built inhabited parts, and people don't seem to have too much trouble with them.
Right now, they
And it
don't.
is nice because you don't even hardly realize where their cars are.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An 11-foot driveway would be typical size you're talking about. Yeah, and then it goes back to a two-car
Yeah.
garage.
Oh, I know.
But you have
Because
to
I
have,
think it's pretty reasonable, most American families today are two-car garages.
Oh, yeah.
but you have to have 30 feet to turn in and a back out lane, so you have to have the width, or you have to
Yeah.
put the garage, your driveway on the right-hand side and your garage on the left-hand side of a narrow lot, so that you can actually make the turn to the garage. But, you know, it gives you, like you said, you get to use the concrete area, the driveway
Yeah.
area gets to be basketball courts and gathering areas, and at the same time, the neighbors don't have to look at your garage doors.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think that's
but
the biggest benefit.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that width thing, because I've, like I said, I've
Yeah.
seen it too many times.
Well, there is no vehicle that is street legal that is going to be bigger than what would fit on a driveway like that. But I get your point. I think that based on some of your reservations and some of the other, I think that this is something that we should potentially right now put as
Negotiable.
nice to have. Well, I think it's nice to have.
Ideal.
And then
Yeah.
what I'd like to do is maybe do a deeper dive as we go through the UDO process to define what that looks like.
What can we
and-
live with? Yeah.
and to address those things, and looking at what we want to accomplish and what we want to avoid, I really like the idea of avoiding these long expanses, 2 and 3
Oh, yeah.
car wide driveways that people, as you're trying to ride your bikes or walk across it, you've got these big conflict points, and you've got these massive garage doors that are not inviting, not
And
attractive.
you've got vehicles parked on the sidewalk for 20 feet or 30 feet.
Right.
I'm just,
Yeah.
that's my concern with it. I've seen
Absolutely.
it, done it.
Yeah.
So-
There's no perfect situation.
Oh, I know.
So when we say this would, I think this is a requested, not a required, and not an aspirational. I think it's right in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And then we can go back and double click on that, and if we want to define it and move it to the required, it would just we would have to spend more time
Yeah.
making sure that it works in all situations.
I think at the very least, the recessed garage is a great idea, because it gets the cars out from in front of the house,
Yep.
and it unblocks the sight lines and the pedestrian lines at the same time.
Right.
So,
But I like the way, I mean, honestly, the way that you're approaching this is, I want to make sure that you're people-centric. You're making sure that this actually works, and we don't want to get too freaky, like, high level, and we ignore actual living. Okay, so we good with that one? We can move on?
Yeah.
Okay. Then the next one, the cost of infrastructure cannot outweigh the value of development patterns. I think that as we already have a base model for that. What Clay Benford put together for us is pretty close. I think it's as close as you can get without getting even further into the weeds. But I think that that is something that we've been doing already, so I think that's required. Would you agree?
Developers to do a fiscal model.
Well, I think that we need to define what that looks like. I'm actually working with Hill Country Alliance. We've got a work group that's going to go together and help refine. You had sent the one from, was it?
Georgetown.
Georgetown. I can never remember if it's Georgetown or Brown. Georgetown. They have a model that actually, it's very close to the one that we had for Alsatian Oaks, and the one that Clay has provided for us in doing this. It doesn't necessarily, what it doesn't capture is some of the capital investments. It was captured costs in a time where there were very little capital investments versus when we're actually spending the money that we need to be spending. So I think that let's just leave that as required, and we'll figure out how to accomplish that. Is that all right? All right, and then physically connect blocks across Highway US 90 through crosswalks and other safety measures.
So that one made me have a question mark.
Yeah.
Is anyone developing on both sides that they could, and
Right.
like even if they were, how are they, who in TxDOT were they going to kidnap?
And we can't,
We want this to happen.
I don't think we can mandate this from TxDOT. I think that's aspirational.
Yeah, that's
Can we call that aspirational?
I know what it would take.
very big
Yes,
aspiration.
yeah, definitely aspiration.
But I do think it brings up in other situations for larger thoroughfares that you might be having on arterials, making sure by setting standards that this doesn't happen again.
Yes.
Put yourself in a situation where you then have another.
We don't want to recreate this
Yeah,
situation.
so the standards
Great
could
point.
be in new situations and new developments where there are other arterial streets being built in the future.
Northern Route.
Rather than Highway 90, say, major thoroughfares.
I'd like to say something about this one, because I don't agree that it should be aspirational. I mean, look at what happened in Alsatian Oaks. We got all the infrastructure done, and we're not connected to the highway, and we don't have any guarantee that we're ever going to get connected to the highway. So it seems to me we have to put in the required part. There has to be a developer and TxDOT agreement as part of the deal. And they can't say, we're going to go do it,
Yeah.
and then have a situation like we have, where they're
Stuck.
still butting heads 3 years later, and there's very little hope that we're ever going to see that 30 feet turn black
Yeah.
into asphalt.
But there
Is there a
there's-
danger of a chicken and egg situation there, where they would need a deal from us to talk to TxDOT and vice versa?
No.
No,
Well,
they can apply for an appointment.
They're the
through
ones
TxDOT.
that start the original discussion with TxDOT, and hadn't, supposedly, they told us, they had a framework, and I don't know how we codify that, but we got caught in this one. I mean,
I think Alsatian Oaks got caught.
yeah.
So-
Well, the city got caught because they're not connected.
It does impact us, absolutely, but I don't know that there's any level of agreement that we could have with the developer that would make that happen, because the Highway 90 specifically is completely outside of our control. 471 is the same thing. It is
We
outside of our
understand.
control, we can influence it. So if we put it as aspirational, that lets TxDOT know this is important to us. This interconnectivity, because part of this is telling TxDOT these things are important. Part of that is informing our own northern route, as we're, because we have people that are building on both sides of the northern route, obviously. So what does that look like? How does that manifest
We
itself?
can require that a developer present us with a signed point of entry agreement from TxDOT.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that
Yeah.
seems to me
Yeah.
would be a logical part of the required stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge
And that's
right
why I
there.
just get scared when you label it as aspirational.
Well, I don't know, and I hope you don't mind me challenging this, I'm trying to think this through. I think that the only negative impact of that is that we had anticipated, we had made some forecasting based on what we expected to be built, and that has been delayed, so that has presented some risk. It's a very managed risk. So I think that how Scott and Leroy have set up our finance, and our financial advisor have set up our finances to be able to deal with something like that. I think that, yeah, we've definitely taken a hit from it, but I don't know that having the agreement in place would have changed the situation because it's TxDOT. But if it is something that, like, I don't know what having the agreement would actually do.
Would it not, I mean, wouldn't, maybe it's a bond or something that you create, the developer gets, but there is a risk to the city if the developer fails in their effort to get the connection. There's a financial risk to the city. And it seems to me, and that's based on the schedule. I mean, you're saying we're mitigating, yeah, we're mitigating it now, but what if we go into recession for 5 years? It may change the complexity. But it seems like if you have some kind of a burden on the developer to reduce the risk and the financial risk to the city through the use of a bond or some other thing, where they're forced to go negotiate with TxDOT early on and create a framework for success and bring that in early in the process. And that's one of the biggest lessons that I learned out of Alsatian Oaks, where we failed. I mean, we just didn't do a good job. We didn't know.
That might be, I still question the value in doing that, but potentially what we could do is put it in as a part of the plat approval the plats won't be approved until they actually have that interconnectivity. I think that's a policy thing, but I think that we should still, does that make sense to capture that in this?
I think what Councilmember Dyer is saying is pretty important, you know,
Yeah.
to even, maybe you do want some letter of commitments from utility providers that they have adequate water, that they have access points from TxDOT, and get a letter prior to recordation of the development agreement.
Well,
I think it's
We already
awesome.
have that.
But
Yeah, so what we do is a utility services agreement as part of this whole process. So we have a separate utility services agreement that precedes generally annexation and the development agreement. It's a separate document.
Okay, so do you feel like you've captured that well enough that you could codify that? Okay, good, because I don't either. So what does that end up looking like? I mean, how would we,
Well, I mean, if it's going into the utility service agreement, you know, then maybe that's the appropriate place for it, and it doesn't need to be housed within this.
Yeah, probably. Reframe the problem we're trying to solve. You or you?
I think it's two. So the one that Councilman Dyer had pointed out was that if they don't have connectivity to a major thoroughfare that keeps them from being able to build out, then it could put the city at risk. If we have invested dollars that are going toward that. A great example is if we have the invested dollar, if the city has actually invested money into part of the offsite infrastructure to be able to support it, with, even if we mitigate risk by doing it very, very carefully, there still is some risk to the city that we do that investment and then the development goes away. It'll eventually get picked up, but it could sit for years
Because they don't have access off of 90.
because they don't have access to thoroughfares.
Okay.
TxDOT roads or even our own.
Which should also be less of a problem for developments not named Alsatian Oaks, because we're requiring more connectedness to the other developments, as there are fewer
No,
farm
well,
fields
yeah,
over
yes
there.
and no.
There'll
But
be
there's
other
commercial
things
developments like
connected
the expansion of the auto dealership that we've already approved, and that's an excellent example. So what was the other problem before I?
So the other problem is making sure that we actually have connectivity. I think that the main purpose of this item on here was that we have that connectivity across, well, you brought this up before too. We put all these standards in place, and we're spending all this time on Highway 90, and then we're just doing, the northern route is just a straight through without those points of connectivity. So it is making sure that there is some sort of connectivity across
Major thoroughfares.
major, well, it's not even just major thoroughfares. If you think about, like, when you look at where, you know, they created the big, the new lake out there, you know what I'm talking about? What they've created, they built this bridge that goes across this massive drainage aisle. But what they could have done is they could have built a bridge underneath it so that it's 12 feet tall so that you can get a bicycle through it. So creating that interconnectivity that's not stopped, it reduces the usability of things like drainage areas. So it's any time where there is interconnectivity to a thoroughfare. I don't know if we would go so far as to say the river. I think that's a little bit much. But there's some sort of, anytime there's a physical separation or a transportation entry point, that you have the ability to get people over it and not just cars over it. I think that would be, I don't know. I would like to have it as a requirement. It could be a suggested, but I'd like to have it as a requirement. What are your thoughts?
Take off the US 90 part because we have no say on that one.
Yeah, and backing up, so just to clarify, that the utility arrangements and making sure they have utilities in place, that's all handled with the USA, but
USA?
the utility services agreement.
Okay.
Yeah.
And but access off of 90 is outside of our purview. There's really nothing we can do from a policy standpoint. And were we to have put it in place, just as an example, Alsatian Oaks would not be progressing at this stage because they have yet to resolve their issue with TxDOT.
Right.
But had we had a policy that said that we won't approve your development plans until you can prove that you have a approved point of entry, then
From
they would have
TxDOT.
redesigned at that time to meet TxDOT's requirements.
They argue they already have. They've designed to TxDOT standards. They haven't,
No, not standards, but requirements.
Yeah. yeah, that's a good point.
Because they
That's a
would
good
have had a
point.
chance to
But that, I'm just
redesign
telling you, that
highway.
isn't, that is not, it. So if that's something we need to include, I think that's a worthy
Add it
thing
like
for
as
us
a
to talk
checklist.
about.
Yeah, 'cause
But
we've
but
got-
be
we've got a
aware,
lot of TxDOT
As a
right away around here.
pre-requirement, before we get to X, we
you
have to
must
have this.
resolve why.
Point of
Can
entry
we-
to
then-
non-city.
Can we do it like this?
control.
Can I make it, just so that we can continue to move on? Can we take this as a set-aside bookmark that we will readdress to Herb's point about that connectivity requirement? Can we
Yeah,
put that aside as a?
Absolutely, because my other concern with that is if you require it up front, there's some developers say, yeah, but we want to know if we're going to get a deal with the city. We want to understand the terms. And I think having a policy while you answer that question, hey, you meet these policy requirements, you're going to get a development agreement. But some of them want to have some progress to the city before they go to TxDOT.
Yeah, but going to
so
TxDOT
anyway.
for a point of entry application is a very affordable thing to do.
Yeah.
You just say,
Well-
I would like to get in here.
So
and-
Ask Will Collins how affordable it's been over the last 3 years.
So let's take this and set it aside and say, this is very important to us.
Yeah.
We want to continue to address this, and we need to look at it as a part of our development agreement standard, like our policies, and then deal with specifically about the interconnectivity across major thoroughfares, across Highway 90, across the northern route, across the drainage areas. Is that okay if we do it like that?
and-
Yes.
And the BMA.
One thing that I think that may be helpful, just thinking about the predictability of having in this process, maybe there's a statement in there that says if land is adjacent to Highway 90, a conversation needs to take place with TxDOT and the city early on in the process to facilitate those access points and how the plan gets laid out. So just preface,
Any TxDOT right away.
Yeah.
any text I read about.
Yeah.
What about just having that in there as a preface, just to put them on notice that we have been experiencing problems with this? I'm just trying to
Yeah.
add to like transparency.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because that's a major hurdle.
Yeah.
When they don't do it. And I've seen a lot of developers do it. I've seen a development down south. It's just on a very simple 2-lane TxDOT highway, and TxDOT said, no, you can't get to those lots from here, period. Now, they've got 5 lots, and they can't get onto them.
So let's do it at any point of connection to
Close together.
a major thoroughfare, a drainage, because if you think about having that interconnectivity across the drainage is important. I think those are the two situations. Major or any thoroughfare or
Geographical obstacles.
geographical, yeah, there you go, geographical obstacles, there has to be a plan in place. We wouldn't mandate that they create a bridge across the Medina River, but we would mandate that they have a plan for how they're gonna deal with that. And that could be, we're not gonna put something here, we'll have the connectivity go around there. Okay, does that
Yeah, that's.
move us forward?
That's
Yeah.
moving forward.
Is there anything else on this one?
No, I think that's great.
Okay, do we need, under transportation, do we need to include things like requirements for accommodations for bicycles or further pedestrian access?
It wasn't something you brought up at the council workshop, if we a mandate, but if it's something that the council would like to see, then absolutely could be a good thing to include.
I think that because we don't have the standards for that, let's put that off to the UDO, if that's okay, and we'll do that as a part. We've already applied for that multimodal transportation plan. Is it okay if we set that aside and leave that in there? Okay, all right, cool. Let's move on to the next one.
Allow a variety of setbacks to emulate the existing pattern, so don't be prescriptive on your setbacks. You want to do with that?
I have no issues with that. That is,
Our historical design guidelines that we published some years ago basically encourage people to emulate what was around them, but our codes wouldn't allow it.
Right. Your design guidelines are really good.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I worked on that for a year or two.
yeah. That's, what's phenomenal is that was created as historic building guidelines, but it captured a lot of the essence of the DNA analysis, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay?
So like in my neighborhood though, we're required to have our houses, our houses are 25 feet set back from the road because our utilities are in our front yard.
Actually, the reason that they're set back that amount is because that's the typical,
Yeah.
that's your utility easement.
Yeah.
Plus the typical
Euclid.
length of a cart.
Yeah.
That's where that 25
Yeah.
feet came from.
But I like the 25 feet back from the road.
Oh, absolutely, that's fine.
We just shouldn't require it.
I suspect that even if we say you can build right up to the line, we're going to get a lot of stuff 25 feet back.
Yeah. Well,
That sounds
Yeah, I don't think that we mandate it, but we allow it.
It's just allowed.
So part of this is also thinking about if we were to rebuild historic Castroville, what would allow us to do that? And if they want to do it in the new sections, then they can do that.
okay.
Because some people will want to put front porches right up to the sidewalk. And then, so Scott, in that 42-foot right-of-way, we can still fit the utilities in there? Do we need to have any kind of setback?
No, so we've already got, our utility easement allows for the separation of water, sewer, electric, gas, et cetera.
And what size is our utility
I think
easement?
it's 10,
10-foot utility easement?
because there's a 10-foot minimum separation between water and sewer. And so what we typically do is you see the sewer being run on one side of the road and the water on the other, and then electric and gas and telephone, all that can go in the same ditch.
Okay,
So 10-foot spring.
okay. Shorten block length to retain the dimension of historic Castroville, I think that we did that already.
You
Okay,
beat that horse.
to death. Fence standards in the existing ordinance provide the right height and requirements, allow for a variety of materials in the new developments. Well, I think, is that what we came up with?
Yeah, your fence standards allow for a variety of heights, 4 foot in the front yard, and we allow for, and so,
But they're not mandated.
No.
no, and this is not recommending to mandate them either, just to provide a variety of material allowances, because right now you're determined it's wood, I believe. You have limited materials, and so that was something that got brought up in the comments.
Which leads to chain link.
And if there's specificity of ones you don't like, hurricane fences or whatever, you can specify the building or not.
You have to, when do you have to step out?
I said that.
Okay.
Thank you. That would have been 40 minutes ago.
Oops.
No, I cleared it.
We did arrange for food to be brought, and it is here.
Okay.
Do you want to take a short recess, or what do you want to do?
Let's take, you guys want to buy a break, get a 5-minute break, and we'll get everything set up?
Let's go for it.
Is that all right?
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break-ish at 3:42.
Fried chicken from Chicken Row.
Chicken from Fast Street Chicken Road.
It's tender.
Of all things,
It's Tender Tuesday.
we gotta support those local businesses.
Yeah, I hope they were what you're looking for.
So is Dash
I really need plugs.
Plugs, yes.
No, just don't have plugs, just plugs.
Plugs out here.
There are?
No, we need them up there. Yes.
my brother's, well, yeah, it's a great business.
And I appreciate that, because that was one thing I told you last time. And I'm remiss in not realizing it at that point, but you really do just have this experience, right? So sometimes if you can help us also better.
One day, Mr. Dixon, you're going to get all of us packs in the same place at the same time.
And I think
Yeah, I
that
think you're good.
this is like this exercise, right?
We can hope. We can wish. We can dream.
We can start to play with the recommendations that are what's all right, bring something forward, you know, we have a little bit more freedom to that.
We've had a lot of community engagement up to this point, so what you're hearing is really what we've been hearing from other people. Some of the concerns, some of the aspirational goals, some of the technical, and people, Castro, if it was necessary. Legally. Scott, will she grab it? We need to bring it up here?
No, she should have stepped up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, right.
Of course, it's somebody who went to it.
Right.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? Is there?
It's still there.
We've been through physical torture, we did an MRI.
I haven't offered to amputate it
No, but the suggestion of going in and helping it unhinged isn't too grand either, so. That's all good.
yet. I went to see a doctor about my ankle last week, which has been bothering me since February,
Yeah.
and she offered to amputate it.
Hey, I can help. I'm trained. Hey, but that's I can tell you other ones. Oh. Okay, I haven't looked at my email yet.
Oh, Scott. So, I got all excited last night. I saw that the Rainbow Theater was opening on Wednesday, so I bought tickets. I bought 2 tickets for me and Carrie to go see Mission Impossible. Yes, I got them.
You're gonna make me go. Yes.
So, do you find somebody from...
Yeah, good. I will find someone. I don't plan on going because I'm gonna get Josh. It's cocktail attire. His idea of yeah, well, I believe so. I believe so.
I'd like to get...
Is it the special event invitation you received from him? Is that what you're talking about? Oh.
I'll double check. But I'd like
Because there was a special event invitation that if they're showing Mission Impossible and they wanted cocktail attire.
And then he was like, yeah. He was like, Dad, I finished. And my son's like, and my husband's like, you don't have to finish, but it's probably your day. He's like,
No more cocktail time. Casual.
I think you may have a fish.
So that's actually good enough for long. What does that mean?
Well, it's a tuxedo.
I know.
It's sort of in between. It's sort of in between like business casual and.
Every time I go to a cocktail,
So for men, it's like a suit. For women, it's two-piece suit. There you go.
There is a tuxedo deal at
Are you comfortable?
yes, because it's cocktail attire. Those days gone. My last cruise, I bought 2 tuxedo shirts. You can laugh already. I bought 2 different tuxedo shirts so that I can dress up while dress up. I'm done wearing freaking tuxedos. That's a hard Friday.
Hear what I'm so excited.
Have you ever been to Europe before?
I haven't been to France. I've been to Germany. I've spent a lot of time in Ireland. A lot of time. Spent a decent amount in the UK, in Amsterdam,
Thank you,
but
back.
not. I kind of drove through Germany. I only spent a few days there, but it's always been work. So I do like sightseeing when I'm at work, but not that much.
Yeah, I lived there 5 years. I lived 15-minute drive from Alice's for the first 3 years, and then I lived in Belgium for 2 more years. We'll never, ever be that way here. Ever. I'm not sure I'd want to live
I might be okay with that. We were talking about major impediments to walking. We have one major impediment to walking. It's called I was talking to somebody from, well, my brother. And he's like, you know, it's amazing how much so like we're limited during the summer, but only because it's really hot. There's a lot of other places it's cold, it's frozen. So
We got a lot more challenges. Cars are here to stay. I mean, I went to 2 doctor's appointments in Castroville today, and we had to drive the brake. Because my wife can't walk 2,500 feet.
So it's not a matter of forcing, but it's not stopping. It's kind of like what we were talking about with the bridges. It's not forcing people to come together, but it's allowing them to, not building in the constructs that go out there for the.
Oh, yes, definitely. Okay.
I had to consider that their families. I'll be there. I told my dad the cocktail's tired, and he's like, oh.
Tell him it's okay.
Yeah.
Are you serious? Do you want to?
What?
Are you serious? How does not cocktail time for you?
I was serious that I wasn't going to his cocktail attire, but I need to relook at the day and see if we can go. 'Cause, yeah, we probably would like to go. I'll talk to Kelly. Is it next Wednesday? It's this Saturday? Yeah, we'll probably go. Yeah. But family event or really adult event?
One who went to St. Mary's University.
Yeah, well, I don't have young kids. I'm just, yeah, they may not have any interest, but Kelly and
A lot of
I'll,
their
I'll definitely get to it. Are you able
high school
to?
graduates. end
How
up
close
here
are you
at
to
St.
selling
Mary's,
out?
San Antonio.
My pastor back home actually went to St. Mary's and the
got
seminary
one?
here in Hartford.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I'll
I
definitely.
knew a lot of St. Louis
I'm excited.
kids.
I'm very
when I was a
excited.
kid, so,
You know one more.
yeah,
Um,
Actually, you know what you laughing about? Because I need to send a seal
I'll
of
read that t-shirt.
I grew up on the Illinois side
the
though.
seal of love. You need to send it all to me. I keep forgetting.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll do it right now.
So, I grew up on the east side of the river and now I'm on the east side of the river.
Well,
It seems to be a theme.
Yeah, continue us off first. I had a friend up there, I went to visit, we drove over to SIU to hear Yes do a concert at the SIU campus.
I'll send him a bill for the rental. I'll put me lumber on my competition. See if we can make some money.
You rent them space on our lawn?
Yeah, it's right here. So I can just say, sir, it's about an inch. Not about a foot.
Hey Josh, we're going to be charging you for an inch of rental space for lumber.
For what?
For this lumber, storage.
Okay, true story. The contractor called me and he's like, "You think the city would let us store all of the lumber behind City Hall?" And I was like, "I don't want to ask."
It's being stored across the street though, right?
No, we stored it over the lot.
Okay.
Only if you build me a carport, so I can stick with it.
You got to have space for Reba.
My roof's hot.
Yeah.
I gotta figure out how to get that on my roof. I can go out there and pick out some cookies probably in it.
I believe it.
These are kind of cool. Little corn thingies.
They're good. I couldn't tell what they were.
Corn.
Are they just corn?
It's like
They're almost hush puppies. is what
It's like
they're saying.
fried cream corn. My wife made fig bread. We have this fig tree or fig clump that has just, oh my gosh, we have gotten so many figs off there.
We had 4 when we moved into our house. We still have figs from 2021, which is good because all the fig trees died.
Yeah.
There's one this tall now. Haven't bought
Well,
jam
it's
in
not
3
safe
years.
to go back to California now. They just released the Manson person.
The Manson, oh, the person from the Manson family?
Yep, Leslie Van Houten has just been released from prison.
Along with 50 and 12 and Deer Creek, so, yeah. David's Marcus.
We need to wait for Deborah to re-record, right? Did she stop the recording, or is it still on?
And they've limited her to only 3 years of parole.
I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
They limited her to
The
only
camera's
3
still going,
years of
but
parole.
as far as
Mm-hmm.
the meeting recording, is the meeting recording paused, or is it still going? Is the meeting recording,
It's paused.
it's paused, okay.
Now, this is going.
All right. The mayor's ready to restart. We're ready when you are.
Okay, let's reconvene at 3:55. So, back to fences, we're at fences. So we talked about the fence standards, we're good with those. And I think we said add or remove the mandate on fences.
To allow for, allow a variety of materials. And so they could, in the development agreement, they could propose materials, alternative materials, basically.
But they're not mandated to put up fences.
Correct. So currently in your ordinance, they would be, particularly with commercial, they have commercial fence standards separating various zoning classifications under your existing standards. And previously you said you'd recommend potentially removing those as well as a mandate, particularly if they're starting to orient in blocks, you wouldn't need to do that, just based off of the way that you use your space.
If we have multi-use neighborhoods, that would be very difficult.
Right.
Yes, sir, yeah.
Or in the same building even, so.
Everyone's good with that?
So I'll just kind of walk through that. So I think everybody was good with that. Stop me, don't let me run you over. Stop me if I'm wrong. We talked about the accessory dwelling units. Allow them, but don't make them required. The scale of the accessory dwelling unit should be appropriate to the principal structure. Will we define that through the UDO, though?
They will be, yes. In the UDO, you would go through a process and really delineate where they would be allowed, where they wouldn't. You could do that geographically, you could do it by zoning type, or however you wanted to, or you allow them wherever you deem fit. You can just say that they're allowed in all classifications. So that is correct.
Okay, let's talk about the services within 2,500 feet. Do we want to further define that?
In some ordinances, this could be it could be a school, and you could make school sites within certain distances or reserve sites for schools, knowing based off of population density that a school may be triggered. You could do this as retail service or, your daily necessities, those types of things. And so there's a wide variety of specificity, or you could let it be something that is aspired to accomplish full neighborhoods that's negotiable under your development agreement. But generally what you would want to do is make it to where if they had daily services within 2,500 feet, it's possible to accomplish that by a short bike, walk, or drive away. And that's the goal, is to provide options and allow options within a neighborhood and not isolate uses where you get straight residential, where they have to drive out on Highway 90, go down the road 3 miles to access just a daily service. And so it could be, that is a goal or as a requirement.
Ensure is a very powerful word. Encourage.
I think we ensure. I think that should be, well, this personal, let's weigh in on this, but I think we should mandate that. And I would even take it a step further and say, well, I think it should be must. And I think that it shouldn't be limited to like a single service. Not like I'm going to have a school that's going to be within 2,500 feet, so we're not going to provide any other services, but there's a school that's right here. So I think that we further define that to say, like, and I don't know how you do this. So you say you must have at least, 2 or 5 or whatever services within that. The included services could be school,
Right.
church, retail.
Obviously, this would have to be in a major subdivision that has both commercial and residential development in it, because if somebody's coming in and just doing a residential development, like the one
MPO.
on 471, there's no way they can accomplish that.
It's not true.
What kind of services are they going to provide with it?
They actually will have. So they have commercial up on 471. They have access to the commercial on the other side of Provident.
Okay.
So they would actually meet that requirement with their existing development agreement.
Yeah, but they have no idea what's going to be built on those commercial properties.
Correct, but they are there. We're not mandating what people have to build there.
And I think you're right that, for example, a school would probably lie outside the realm of feasibility
Yeah,
in that development with its current size.
especially
But-
without the cooperation of the school district.
Yes.
But-
But there are plenty of developments that are larger than that, that saying, we want you to sell one block to the school district.
Oh, yeah.
Not even necessarily like donate it, just,
In a major
we want you
city.
to save one to sell, or we want you to save 2 half blocks to sell to churches. Because otherwise, like a church is a building that's hard for a neighborhood to grow into, because someone would have to put together a bunch of lots and knock down stuff that's there.
What
So I think just
What I would
focus on
suggest
stuff.
is that requirement gets triggered at a certain level of development.
I disagree.
So if I'm doing 10 lots,
If you're doing 10 lots that have services within 2,500 feet, it doesn't have to be on your development, it just has to be within 2,500
what
feet.
if my property is not within 2,500 feet of any services?
Then it won't be in the city's limits.
It will never be annexed.
There are plenty of places in city limits that don't have access to that sort of thing.
Right.
That-
Your neighborhood.
I mean, the school district was
Isn't that a
saying they
bummer,
want
though?
like 4 acres to build a school, a grade school.
Okay.
I think that what you're trying to say, if I'm correct, is you don't want to penalize the little guy.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But I do think that so Ippy Homes is 35 acres, and it's set aside. If it didn't have Provident next to it, then I think that's a bigger deal. But part of what we did in that development agreement, if you remember, is we provided the accommodation for people to be able to walk through
Right.
instead of having to go all the way around, they can walk through it. And so it's providing that access to that. And if it doesn't exist, all they have to do is, like with MP Homes, even if Provident didn't exist, by putting a couple of commercial lots on there,
Okay.
or allowing for mixed use inside of the development, they can accomplish it either way. So it's some sort of services, and they can do that through mixed use, they could do it through single use, they could do it by having,
Okay. That just seems like an overarching requirement, especially for the little guy. I mean, because there are properties on the outskirts of Kesterville right now that are looking at development that would not have any way to accomplish that, other than to create their own commercial development inside a 5-acre tract.
so for that, that's where we have the exception process.
Yeah.
So if something like that comes up, again, this is to handle most of it.
Yeah.
And it's more to handle the big developments, because the smaller the incremental developments, we should encourage those, because that's the best way to grow. But when they come in and they take down 100 or 1,000 homes all at once, we're just trying to make sure that there's not that full residential separation
I
from everything.
thoroughly agree.
So maybe we could turn around and say, ensure that services, and then put in brackets, i.e. school, church, retail, and under the retail specify, because I don't want a gas station in my neighborhood.
Right.
specify it like a restaurant
And who
or
wants to, I guess?
you'd be surprised.
I have a gas station.
What we can do is, we can
But-
elaborate
but-
on this and add some specificity of the intent of, building neighborhoods, not subdivisions, and here's the intent, and then establish on some of these core services.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a really good way of writing it into the development agreement policy.
So I think what we're saying is that we leave it like this. There will be room for exceptions when necessary,
And elaboration.
but there will have to be an exception process, and they will have to go through like a short process. And then we'll further define what those services can be, and if we want to make it so that they can't just tag on to an existing school and say, hey, we already met the requirement, without providing. The true intent is to make sure that people have services that are available close to them, just like we have in
I'm on
Kitchener.
board with that. I just looking for that, for the little guys.
Absolutely. No, I think that's good to do. And I think that we should define that and make sure that we have that exception process so that they can do this. Dark sky ordinances are incorporated into development
Yes.
agreements. We need to define that, so the, which one was it? Was it Round Rock that did the first big one? I keep wanting to go back to Round Rock for some reason.
Someone was modifying theirs at
Dripping Springs, that's
Dripping
where it was.
Springs, yeah.
But the one that they had in there, I think the feedback, Scott, that you got, or that Brianna, you got, was that requirement was too strict, and it was too expensive. And so if we can figure out what that looks like,
But that was what we got from North Park, right? From the car dealership?
Yeah,
Isn't that right? Is that what you're thinking of, when we were having a back and forth with them about, because this was in the process of developing their development agreement, and we were including those standards, and they were like, this is too much, this is way, we just got through doing some stuff near an air base, and this is more restricted than that, and that seems silly, blah, blah, blah.
what I think seems silly is driving in at 3 o'clock in the morning when it's pitch dark, and you can almost hear the lights coming out of them.
Yeah.
And
Well, our Catholic Church is doing that right now. Actually, it's a separate issue we have to address at some point.
But this is really about stopping it going forward, rather than going back. I mean, we can't fix a lot of the stuff, but we can keep it from happening again.
And even as an attachment, you could have the International Dark Sky Ordinance, so you just provide it to them, and they have it, and they can, modify it as they see fit. If they want modifications, bring that to the council, or adopt it as a straight standard where they don't have to go and create it, and cut some cost as well, and time.
So in the CPS territory, Scott, that mandate would carry through to their streetlights, correct? And we can mandate that from them?
I still don't have a really good idea. I know that typically, utility providers will have a list of apparatus and fees associated with each type of apparatus that you select. But I have yet to get anything out of CPS that would give, like, just show me what your options are. I don't have those options. But in theory, yes. In
So is
theory, what we would do is say, in the CPS territory, you have to select this item, which is in compliance with what we're looking for. And they'll have a dark sky friendly version.
But if it's in our, I guess, who coordinates it with CPS? Is it the developer?
Yeah, the developer coordinates, but we would need to prescribe that in our code. Okay, this is
Describe
what,
your fixture types and what fixtures go on certain streets, where or intersections, and so then you would coordinate that with your utility provider.
well, and to the mayor's credit, I think one of the reasons you bring this up is, we talked about this before, and we don't really have the ability to prescribe, this is what the poles are gonna be. We can't tell them, hey, go buy this pole, because the utilities actually prescribes that. They have a list, and we would need to make sure that what we pick is something off of their narrow list of options.
So we need to refer to their requirements and leave it at that.
No, because there's options.
I think that we
That
leave it. so we-
CPS allows you a variety of options, and we want to select the variety that's appropriate for our developments.
Or narrow that
Yeah,
selection.
we don't want to just say comport with CPS, because there's too many variables there.
So I think that what we're saying is that is a requirement that dark sky ordinances are utilized, and we'll take it the step further and work with CPS to find out which, like, streetlights they have, but this would go for all businesses, this would go for the homes. Right? Okay. Everybody good with that? Right?
Yeah, because they can't get any, they can't go anywhere else. They'd have to take that and go to CPS and say, I need to work within these parameters, and CPS would give them their list. Okay.
And I think that the next one, recess the garage behind the principal front facade or allow alleys to serve rear-loaded products. I think we already addressed that in the transportation section. Are you good with that?
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
22 of 33.
All right. And so the next thing we were looking at is other items that you can include in development agreements. Maybe you want wireless mesh if it's near a park, or fiber optic to all homes. I saw that in one of the reports that may be something you want to have as a standard issue. These are just some other elements that weren't necessarily mentioned during the council workshop that we thought may be useful. Innovative stormwater solutions for water quality, so that you clean the water before it hits the river. Those types of things you could actually negotiate in. And maybe these are either by right or incentive types of things, but we just wanted to add some other elements that you may want to consider. These are the public realm infrastructure, so roads, utilities, larger sidewalks, lighting, signage enhancement, traffic facilities, so your intersection improvements, stormwater, and then some quasi-public amenities would be plazas, green space, or park improvements, trails, and those would be some elements. Or again, desired end users. If you're targeting a venue or a convention center or other city facilities that you like, you could incentivize those and then have those specificities written into your development agreements. Or other end users such as, let's say that you wanted to have the fanciest fast food chicken roll, and you want just saying you can go after a particular.
You must build at least one chicken place.
We don't have a
Or job
KFC.
creation. So those are the
That or
things
Popeyes.
I think that you can do there. And then enhanced designs, landscaping, streetscaping, your architectural styles. We may not want to be super prescriptive on this. As we've noted, it's not always that architectural feature that's yielding the results you're looking for, but maybe it is. So those are some of the other elements. We just wanted to get on your radar to see if any of these would be included in the by right, or do you want to just leave these as, if you're looking for incentives, these are the things that we would want to seek in return for incentive dollars.
So it's these two slides that we're talking about. Let's go back to the other one.
And then these
sorry.
are site development costs, so sometimes they may need to oversize for an adjacent development, or maybe it's unusual cut and fill because of topography issues, water reclamation or rainwater harvesting if they wanted to include that, solar, alternative energy, vehicle charging stations, some of those things you may want to have as well. It's those three slides. Yes, sir.
Let's go back to the first one. So on the roads, I think that we're defining the road types in the UDO.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
That would be a typical thing you'd write in, yeah.
Okay, so I think that, I don't know that we can hit anything specific on roads. On utilities, the things that we had discussed were underground mandated,
I think you put the word underground.
underground utilities.
Yeah.
I think it would be wise to put underground in there.
Yep,
Yeah.
underground utilities.
And I think aspirational would be with cosmetic covers. So they make covers for transformers that look like rocks. They don't totally look like rocks, but they look like rocks.
They look like transformer covers.
They look like rocks.
Or you make them vault them. I mean, San Marcos now requires vaults. They don't let you do any above ground transform. You gotta put it in a vault.
Really?
And they're not having issues with them leaking. Texas State had been vaulting for a long time. The city was reluctant, and they had a conversation with their utilities and weren't having any issues. And we were having, power outages all the time, and so they ended up vaulting them.
They
But
voted their entire legislature. They're all underground.
Okay, so
There, utilities, underground utilities. There's a word, and I don't remember it right now, but for when they're not just buried, they're like in a little box under, like a tube. or a
Encased.
panel. in case.
You're talking about conduit.
Conduit, to make them easier to replace or.
Definitely.
That's why they're redoing River Bluff to that.
I know. I'm just saying, if we're gonna say buried, we should also say.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So utilities would be included, so it'd be conduit, no direct bury?
I think that those are minimum standards. I don't know. I can check on that though. So you want sleeved or conduit
Yeah.
utilities.
Oh, yeah.
Well, at least the electrical and the fiber optic, yeah.
Prohibit, yeah, prohibit direct
Fiber
burial.
optic is a wish.
No, I think fiber optic is a reality, and that is everybody, that's what they're doing. So it's like, that's everybody from Spectrum to AT&T, everything that they're building now is fiber optic. And so it's making sure the developers provide the accommodations to make that happen.
I would recommend you take out or wireless mesh.
Correct.
Because it's too many undesirable solutions that would fit in that category.
Right.
And if you just leave it at fiber optic, that's
Fiber optic,
fine.
yeah.
Mandatory fiber optic.
Fiber optic
So
to
if you
the
want to
house.
talk about-
You might want to say to the house.
Fiber optic to the house, yes.
And the wireless mesh is also a product that may be obsolete by the time we get this complete.
Just out of curiosity, what does wireless mesh mean to everyone else? Because when I was at college, you could walk around campus anywhere with your laptop, and even if you're in the middle of a field, you had Wi-Fi.
So there's a difference between, that would be considered a public Wi-Fi. So I think that that would be aspirational as public Wi-Fi mesh, and that would be that. But what I think that what this says is on the two sides of speed and reliability, the most reliable, highest speed is going to be fiber optic. The lowest reliability and lowest speed is going to be wireless. So I think we take out wireless mesh, put Wi-Fi, mesh Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi as aspirational. Yeah. I don't even think that's preferred.
I suspect that might be something that we do later when these areas have been built out a little bit more.
Right.
Not
It's
something we
easy,
want up front.
and that's something that, as technology increases, I mean, Elon Musk is going to put it all up in the satellites, right?
He's working on it. Wi-Fi router.
Okay, so utilities, we said required underground in conduit, preferred would be vaulted, or do we want to make required vaulted?
I think what's the ground like?
Well,
That's gonna vary.
Specific.
Yeah, so let's say preferred.
Preferred depending, because the grounds are different, I mean.
Yeah, ask the ones that were trying to put the wine cellar, dig through solid rock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just need a bigger scoop.
That's true. Okay, so you caught that?
Yes.
The vaulted would be preferred. So larger sidewalks, I think our standard right now is a 5-foot sidewalk, isn't it?
Yeah. That's for.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but I think that the thing that we had talked about was with the sidewalks, it's a 5-foot sidewalk on either side with a green separation. There would be a planting area. And we would then need to define what goes in that green planting area. So how
Which, to a certain extent, is just goes in your road section.
Yeah, you can write your street standards to
Okay.
create the specs for that.
So can we put that into the development agreement standards so that they are prepared for it? Say 5-foot road on either side with isn't it a 5-foot green space in between?
Yeah, we're gonna have a 5-foot road on either side and a 30-foot sidewalk.
Sorry.
Everyone's gotta go buy a
That's how
smart
you
car.
program that 42 feet.
Okay, does that work?
Yes.
All right, and then we'll define the road section in the UDO.
A variety of road sections, yes.
The lighting, I don't remember, if that was the dark skies lighting or, the fixture type.
If you wanted special fixture types, acorn head, for downtown, for urban areas, or you can just let them, defer to your ordinance. If you're making it mandatory to have dark skies, your fixtures are going to probably be prescribed by CPS, and then you have a certain number. That may
And they're going to change every year. As the manufacturers modify their fixtures.
Yeah.
So it's probably covered, I guess.
Okay. Well, the other thing I think that we need to address in the UDO, I don't think it's here, it's in the UDO, we had talked before, I gave an example of, there was a street, an entrance to a neighborhood that had, along the pathway, it had lights, so it had lighted pathways that were in that green space between the street and the pathway, and that was actually what created the ambient light for the street, and then only at major intersections did they have the cobra heads. So I think that maybe if we put that in as aspirational, if you're okay with that. And if anybody can't picture what that looks like, I can send you a picture of it. It looks really kind of cool. Traffic facilities, what did we say with?
As for any intersection improvements that would be necessary, you don't necessarily need to spec those. Just know that, if they ask for it, then maybe wrap it into the development agreement.
Yeah, I wonder, because like, if you look at, TxDOT has different apparatuses that aren't so, like I look at Houston Square and it's completely consumed by silver boxes and logos. Are there TxDOT standards that would be in-ground, so maybe it is signaling underground vaulted?
And you could determine mast arms that have to be black, or instead of galvanized. I mean, if you wanted that type of look, what community was it? We were working in a community, and they did everything in hunter green. All their mast arms, all their the street sign posts, everything was in the same hunter green, and so it was kind of uniformed around the city rather than galvanized.
Steinbach red.
Steinbach red, yeah. I think that, if we hold more true to kind of the combination of European and Texan, we do black powder coated as, honestly, I think it needs to be required. I think we need to require a higher level of, if you think about any kind of public infrastructure, just requiring a slightly, it doesn't cost that much more to make it look nice.
Is there a requirement for ADA crosswalks and
Federally, yes.
That's federal.
hearing devices for people who can't hear?
That's all ADA, yeah, that's all federal.
That all goes in with sidewalks?
Yep.
Doesn't have
that's-
to be specified?
No, that is automatic.
And even the reading of the braille now at the
Yep.
intersections, that's all new minimum
Yep,
standards.
that's
by
federal,
ADA.
has to be.
Nice.
The switch beeps so that the blind people can actually find it. So
Nice. Okay.
And so you do want, so black powder coated fixtures, so this would include street signs, mast arms.
Holes.
I can
Yeah.
live with that.
Yeah.
I think that would be a minimum. I think that aspirational, it would be more of the finial type. And we could define, I think that comes through the UDO. But this is letting people know there's going to be something different and refer to sign standards. Innovative stormwater solutions. I meant to ask Russell about this. One of the things, this would be more aspirational than anything. If you think about one of the biggest problems that we have right now, especially with the flatness of Medina Valley, is that we have these flood events that are astronomical. And we continue to put impervious cover that exacerbates that. And so if we put in as either, I don't think it's required, it's either preferred or aspirational, where they create, if you think about some stormwater retention.
Either catch basins or rainwater retention, yeah.
If you think about it like this, they put in, this would be totally aspirational. Everybody puts in gutters. The gutters go into a gray water,
Stormwater, rainwater capture. yeah.
rainwater capture, and it goes to a rainwater storage, and then you reuse that as gray water for irrigation. Again, totally aspirational.
And as Phil said last week, that won't merely meet their need anyway, so they will exhaust that on a regular basis during our summer times as well.
But at least you're still reusing it.
Yeah, and you're keeping it from running down the street past your neighbor's house.
Right.
So,
And you're not letting it get filled up with oil and all the other stuff that
it goes into the river, right?
We're driving the price of a house
Well-
up so high that contractors are going to sell us I don't want to do business.
Well, that's
I mean,
why it's aspirational. It's not preferred and it's not required. These are the things
They
that,
have to negotiate it.
yeah, it would be aspirational. If you want to do this, this would be great. We might be willing to
We wanna do
invest
that, we wanna do
some of
this.
our future tax money into something like this, depending on the impact of it. But that's why I say it's aspirational. I think it's a good idea.
To a certain extent, you're just kind of coming to them with a list, and you're like, okay, here's what you got to do, here's what we'd like you to do. And here's a list of ways that you can really affect the practical value of this home.
The reason why I
You know, more than putting in a third kind of siding on this one wall over here. Like,
We're sticking an extra gable on there just because.
yeah, and instead of sticking on an extra gable, catch your storm water, put gray water out separately.
So I have this question. This is the medic coming out in me. Where would this water be stored?
That is an engineered solution.
Cisterns.
It would be
Because
stored in the regular drinking water. Just kidding.
no, the reason why I ask
In the bathtub.
is we have West Nile virus and malaria are now in Texas and the mosquitoes. And they don't want us to retain water, standing water, if we can avoid it. So that's why I'm asking this question.
Yep.
Well, typically, a rainwater retention system is closed.
Okay.
It's not an open barrel, it's a closed barrel.
It's supposed to be
Supposed to
closed.
be- Starts that way.
Yes. I'm just asking these questions because.
So what you're trying to avoid is standing water where mosquitoes can breathe.
That's it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Perfect. And I think that that is a part of the, if they went through any kind of water retention, then, or water reclamation, then it would have to go through this.
Then it has to go to a code.
And then we would
code
absolutely look
compliance.
at something like that.
Yeah, that's why I'm just throwing, it's
I like
popping in
it.
my head.
Yep, okay. All right, I think we're through that, yeah? Next one?
Have we got a few more minutes?
Okay,
These may be more
Site-specific, but any, plazas or green spaces, park improvements, or if you have, linear trails where you want them to go and they're going to be going through properties, you have those as desired spaces. So these may not be something you need to take action on. but-
why do you call them quasi-public amenities?
Well, because they could be privatized plazas that serve a public purpose.
Gotcha.
Maintain trails on other people's properties.
It's possible, yeah.
So,
Well,
Keep talking about it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, keep talking
I was
about
going
it.
to point at Josh in the back of the room with the barbecue place over there.
oh, right across the
Or
street here.
over by Friendies.
Yep.
Well, it's not Friendies anymore, but,
Rocky
those
Tapas.
are sort of public, but sort of not.
All right.
Open to the public, yes.
Are there any items on this list that you want to make mandatory, or is there anything pretty much site-specific? That's why I tried to categorize it.
Well, I think the one thing that would be on the table for mandatory is any kind of water retention or waterway, any kind of, what do you call it? Stormwater easement, drainage area would have to be somehow improved or maintained. And potentially that could go toward their green space requirement, or maybe it is, if you improve this, maintain it, and provide a public service, then this can go toward your green space requirements.
And so maybe we'll write some standards about some allowance, the flexibility with how drainage gets managed.
And maintenance requirements for those.
Right.
Because
Yes.
I've been in fields recently that were
Right. And we've seen that happens really, really quickly.
does.
Yes.
It looks real pretty right now out here with
As long as you don't have to walk through it.
the
Yeah.
Highway 90 lake.
I turned a bunch of them into compost with my machete.
Well, and I want to, maybe we go back to, this is kind of in the same area. We talked about a 12,000 square foot on average. So if you have your total development divided by 12,000 square feet, you have to have per living unit, it's 12,000 square feet, but it doesn't have to be on that lot.
Divided with the lots number divided into the green spaces and common areas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that the overall total square feet of the entire development divided by 12,000
The
is how many
the
units?
residential units comes out to 12,000
Are
square
we
feet.
specifying a minimum size square footage for a house?
No, I don't think so. I think that
Should we?
I don't
That
think
is
so.
in the current like residential standards that have gone in previous agreements. It was 1,400.
We-
It's
is that
in
on?
the Alsatian.
No,
Code.
it's not in ours. Your current ordinance.
1,450 square feet.
Mine's 1,450 square feet. And it's really small.
Mine's 1,900.
So I don't know, I don't think that we put in a minimum size, because one of the things that we talked about was ensuring that there is more affordable, livable, nice space. So you could have a really nice home that's not huge. Like my daughter doesn't want a huge home, she wants a nice home. So she could live quite easily in an 800 square foot house. What you want to avoid is you want to avoid the little box house plopped down to nothing. You're
The little 600 square foot rectangles with 812 roofs.
yeah.
What
I
about
just described every historic home in
minimal
Castro.
lot
Nice.
width?
That's terrible. What's that?
Do we want to specify minimal sized lot widths?
I don't think so. I think that some of that comes through the development agreement, but if we want to allow, if we do 12,000 square foot on average per living unit, they could do that in a multifamily. They could do a duplex with, it's right
Yeah,
in the
but that's a
middle.
very large amount of space. When you listen to developers talk today, they don't want that much space. Now,
You don't want that
I
much
agree
space
that
for a lot.
some of that is offset with green space allocation, which I think is a great idea. But even if you look at Alsatian Oaks, even after you do green space allocation, you don't come anywhere close to 12,000 square
I
feet.
think you actually do, don't you?
No, I don't
I
think
think
so.
after the green
Not
space
unless you
requirement,
50
include
foot
the school
frontage.
tract and all the drainage area, but, yeah, if you're looking at the minimum, like really small lots come in at 50,000 square feet, 5,000 square feet for a small lot. I've seen those.
so what, I guess the point that I'm making is he mentioned something about clustering. So if you could do a cottage court that has small little condos in it with open areas around it. So what clustering does with that minimum square foot requirement is you have clustering where what the developers don't want is they don't want to spread it all the way out, because then you're talking about like an 80-foot wide lot is insurmountable when it comes to the public infrastructure. And if they can't justify building it, we can't justify maintaining it. But what you can do is you build the cluster where the bulk of the infrastructure is all in one place, so it's a lot more affordable to do it like that. And then you create open spaces in between. So part of what we've talked about is the importance of the country life, the rural living, and so you can accomplish that by clustering it, leaving open spaces in between, especially if they're improved and usable.
I'd like to do a little investigation on the 12,000 square foot limit, just to see what we're looking at in terms of some of the developments that we admire, that we think were done well, and just see what their ratios are, just to see if that 12,000 is a realistic number.
Yeah, I'm totally good with it. I think that this is, like, we don't have to mandate a 12,000. I don't think that in today's environment, 12,000 square foot lots make sense.
Right, I think diluting the lot size with the green space and public spaces to reach a certain level, or basically a maximum density per acre for the development is quite achievable. But we need to know what that number is, and I think 12,000 might be rough.
It is.
Well, I just don't know.
All right.
Just a small technical detail. You mentioned like average of 12,000 per living unit. I don't know how many duplexes or fourplexes we would ever get anyway,
Right.
but we might say that like one multifamily building of up to 3,000 square feet can count as one living unit for that calculation.
Structure, maybe not
Yeah.
unit, but structure.
Yeah, essentially, well, you want to put a limit on how big the structure is. You want a house size, but like all those new houses in Country Village at 3,000 square feet, that's the same size as the apartments. They're actually bigger than the apartments buildings behind my house. And but like in terms of impact in the neighborhood, space.
You actually have a good point with that, because if we're saying that we're going to allow accessory dwelling units, now you've got
2 units.
2 units, right? So we would have to define what that
Divide
looks
it.
like.
Yeah.
So-
Maybe not by dwelling units, but by residential lot.
So how can we accomplish that then in creating the open spaces? How do we, I think that we're all on board with creating a standard that creates open spaces that allows for clustering without over-inundating the developers with just unusable, I don't think it's unusable, that's the thing, is that this it improves the quality of life.
But it's not sellable, and that's going to be their argument.
One way, and Bastrop, what they did is they did it by block. So every block has a designation, and it varied. It didn't have to be the center section. It managed stormwater and park within the block. So that was one way to do it. And so you get these linear green strips through the blocks that became trails, or space that interconnected your blocks, creates a secondary transportation network as well. But it's also used for stormwater when it floods. So when it rains, it can be little catch basins, and then that creates a chain of ponds, so that you're not having these big peak flush events as well. So that was one way that they dealt with it.
So you just brought up something else that I'll bookmark, and that is water retention by the block instead of by the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay, so on this one, do you feel like there's a way that we could define I think that the measurement is average per something, I don't know if it's dwelling unit, because that would not incorporate it. I don't know how you would separate out accessory dwelling units with homes versus a duplex.
We can go and do some analysis and come back with some recommendations. We know what you're trying to accomplish, just threading green space into so that it's not overwhelmed or just leftover space.
Okay.
It's programmatic, right?
Are we okay with putting in putting a bookmark in it right now that says,
Revisit this.
and if you want to reduce it, let's put a number on it right now and just say per development.
Per residential lot, or per lot.
Is it a total, maybe it's a total square foot?
Yeah, that's what I had offered, was like up to 3,000 square feet of multifamily can count as one LU.
Okay.
Yeah.
12,000, that's just.
Well, what that leaves us with is 9,000.
Oh, probably 10.5. Probably gonna have a 2-story, like 3,000.
We're not talking about you're not talking about the residence size, you're talking about the lot size. You want to have the average lot size with its proportional green space to be 12,000 or 10,000 square feet.
What I'm actually trying to accomplish is allowing for some multifamily.
Yeah. Which would be on one lot.
Well, but the multifamily, if you have 10 families, multifamily,
Big multifamily.
then you want to have a lot of green space around it.
Yeah.
And so the idea is, instead of spreading them out, 12,000 square foot lots, you put them all together and you create the space around them. That's the clustering portion of it. So that's really what I'm trying to do, is create that. We have a very, inside of historic Castroville, there's an openness that is glorious.
Well,
It's not
You're
feasible
going to have a
financially.
different formula for single-family residential than you will for multifamily residential.
Mm.
Because obviously, you put that many families in a small enough space, you're going to require a lot of green space to accommodate for that if you're counting residential units.
I still think that
I don't think it's a bad idea, though.
we mandate
I'm not
12,000
arguing
square
with
feet, we're going to drive builders away. They're not going to do it.
So let's, well,
I
and-
agree with you, all the things that you want to count in there, but even if you do that, Alsatian Oaks, the average is 6,000.
I was about to say,
Is it 6,000?
That's 6,000
yes, it's
square feet
6,000
is
for
the
Alsatian
average.
Oaks.
Okay. I thought it, no, I
And
thought
that
it was
includes the
8,000.
green space.
No,
It's 6,000.
It's 6,000 for Alsatian Oaks.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we draw a line in the sand and say right now, for now, until we refine this, we say maximum of 6,000 square feet per dwelling unit? Not lot size,
You said maximum, do you mean minimum?
minimum.
Minimum. And that's.
Yes, thank you, yes.
Minimum size.
Oh, like, wait, what did I do? Yes.
Lot
minimum.
size and proportional green space in common areas. Now, does that include the streets, pavement? Common
Green
areas?
space.
Just green space, not common areas.
It's a great question. I think it is
We can-
green space and improved, not, doesn't include asphalt,
It's not include streets.
not streets, not parking lots. It could be parks that have hardscape on them. It could be improved, whatever.
We're almost at.
Is that,
Okay.
Yeah, we can probably move this.
We definitely
We gotta crank out.
Put a placeholder to be determined.
I don't want to call
I
it.
think we put let's put a placeholder in
There,
there.
yeah, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
minutes.
have an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. We'll go back and really brainstorm this, pull some
Okay.
different standards and see if we can get you to where you want.
So for right now, we'll say 6,000 square feet,
Minimum.
average minimum lot size. And then we'll,
Do y'all remember when John Anderson and Bryce Cox talked about, I'm trying to say.
20 minutes.
It was in that form-based discussion, I'm trying to help this along. They showed, he showed different density patterns, and those are all in that uniform
Yeah, that form is-
national code, whatever it's called.
Yeah, there's a standard for this. We can go and pull that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, I think what you're saying, when you talk about, the
Been done.
dedication of
Yeah.
open space, et cetera, that's already been
We're-
outlined in that
Yeah,
code.
we're not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
We'll go back and pull that.
Okay.
So we need to show you some
Yeah.
examples of that.
perfect,
Very
okay.
All right.
That's good.
Thank you.
And did we say that improved drainage areas can count as green space?
I would say yes.
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 I think you have the standards with that.
Yes.
Improved and maintained
And
drainage.
maintain. We'll draft
Well-maintained
some
and
language.
improved drainage areas can be counted as green space.
Yes.
Okay,
But usually the drainage areas and the floodplain areas are counted in a different category that we specify as non-usable.
Yeah.
And it's not counted as part of the residential lot size.
I know mine isn't, the creek, dry creek bed behind my house.
That's right. Alsatian Oaks
It's-
only
it's not
includes
counted.
your house, your yard, and the designated park green space that's allocated to your house.
Yeah.
It doesn't include the floodplain
Yep.
and other non-usable land. That's a different category.
Yeah.
I tell you what San Antonio, Sarah, River Authority, has been putting trails in all of their flood zones, Leon Creek and San Antonio and Solano Creek. And there are trails, you can go 40 miles, 50 miles, and you will cross roads, but you will not travel on any roads in that trail system in San Antonio. So
That's a great.
that is park system now.
yeah. Well, if you think about it, like linear, that would become a linear, you take it from an unusable drainage area to a usable, improved, maintained linear park, then I think it could count as their incorporated green space.
Yeah, my friend who posted a 40-mile bike ride this weekend, he never got on a city street.
Would y'all be, do you want this in there? I think that's a great recommendation, and it allows for allowances, and it will guarantee that your trail network starts to get incorporated along these creeks, tributaries, and waterways and floodplains.
Right.
That's a great recommendation.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
Okay.
in
As
a
a
linear
mandatory?
park, if they are,
As long as they stay out of my backyard.
if it's, I think if it intersects with any kind of roadway, that there has to be a mechanism to get onto the roadway or over the roadway. Preferably under.
And, perhaps stoplight signal, but I hate to do that.
No, I'm saying over or under, so
Grade
it's-
separated, we'll call it grade
Continuous
separated, that way
separation.
it'll leave either one.
so they can get across it without having to go through a stoplight.
Okay.
And we said that is, are we okay with putting that as a requirement to be further refined as we move forward with UDO?
Sure.
Okay,
Yes,
all right.
all right, cool.
I think that aspirational, creating plazas where you have the 330 by 330 foot park in the center, or whatever size that park in the center is with centralized parking, that would include a religious institution, a school, retail, could include mixed use, a Houston Square basically, would be highly encouraged.
I would be happy to directly incentivize that. I think that's a very worthwhile investment
Is
to
that-
create a Houston Square.
Preferred, or is that aspirational?
I think it's preferred with my wallet in my hands.
You know, I think it's preferred to accomplish, as one of the examples, to accomplish the services within,
Support the services, yeah.
Right.
It's a great idea.
okay.
We can draft some language and just have it. All right.
What about shared parking lots? So we do have to have some sort of accommodation for big box, because there will be big box. Along Highway 90, there's no way around it. But what would be the requirements for the preferred for accommodating a big box without creating Walmart parking lot over and over again?
That's tough because those end users specify the number of parking spaces they need. For example, in San Marcos, Target was not going to go in because Chewy's overtook one of their parking spaces. They were short one, and they were about to pull the plug, and they ended up canceling the lease. It was really, so
Wow.
there's
And
end
then
users that
88
have.
mandates how
certain
many
things about that.
handicap parking is required for each business establishment.
For right now, I mean, just for the sake of
Yep.
time, I would probably leave that out.
Leave that
but,
out, okay.
Okay,
Is there, oops, sorry, was there anything else on this one we need to get as mandatory? Right now, just based on time, we'll list everything else that's not in here as probably as possibly incentivized, but
That's
the
what it's
mandated list is really over.
Okay, cool. Next.
All right. All of these probably would be requested by the developer, so we don't need to go
Yep.
over these. And then here's just a checklist, like what happens with whom and who does it when. You know, these are things that you would typically see in your development agreements. I read over your Alsatian Oaks development agreement. You guys did a very good job on this. There are a few things I wanted to call attention to, like assignments. We talked about this earlier. You have the ability to allow assignments or not allow assignments. Most, you know, what that would do is the development company could come in, and site speculators do this often, where they come in and they'll get all these entitlements and then just go sell it to someone else, and they just raise the value of the land. You made all these commitments and they had no plans at all. Happens all the time. And so then you think that you're getting a development, they go sell it to someone else, and you're like back to the drawing board because some of the standards don't work for them, and you're back through that deal because they assigned it. But sometimes it makes sense for an assignment to take place. It's just things to be mindful of. There's nothing we really have to get done.
So how do we protect against that?
You would need to have assignments come back to the council, and rather than be allowed.
Oh, assignments for sale.
Limited to the individual or to
Yes,
the corporation.
Yeah. And then all of these other elements are just checklists. We can fill these out and put this into those policies.
And one big thing you can put on there then towards the top is if no, you know, until they get us that sign thing with TxDOT saying access onto 90, you can't go any further on the checklist.
Okay, yeah, so make that the non-starter, so that,
Yeah, if you
So
can't-
it's
if you can't
progressive.
get on the highway, you got no
Yeah,
development.
you can't continue down the checklist until that's
What
done.
if they're not on Highway 90?
Oh, yeah,
It doesn't apply, not applicable.
It's
Then
that,
I'm
then
just-
go
I'm just
down
poking
to
the bear.
this.
All right.
I can play that game.
and then the cost. This will be a good conversation. So currently, the way that you all assess, Brownie, you may want to check on this. I pulled this straight from your fee schedule. This was the only thing I could find on development agreements, is that they would do a consultant fees plus 5%. Is there a standard fee for, so right now, so right now you don't have a standard fee for development agreements. Most cities we found, they range between $5,000 and $10,000 minimum submittal fee for development agreements. And so that was the
I'll
price.
back up. So what we do here, and you're aware of this, through Clay Benford's efforts, we establish an escrow agreement for the development agreement. So prior to doing any work on any legal work on a development agreement, they have to sign this escrow document. The escrow document has language in it, and it generally establishes a base fee for the legal, and then it says, it has additional language that says other expenses as, as,
Assessed.
as required, actual costs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. What we should include in there is the charrette fee for the city designer.
Well, to your point, to his point, we don't have something on our fee schedule currently. That's what we're using. So yes, I think that's where we're
That's what, yeah.
all three of us
We
are
need
headed
to
that
add that.
direction.
Yeah.
So we add that, and then it can be waived once we develop these. You don't have to do it if you do this.
Right.
If it falls within this range, then you don't have
If you meet
to.
all our guidelines.
There you
Not
go.
for the development agreement,
Yeah.
legal fees, but for the
Can be
charrette.
reimbursed.
If we can make this so that it doesn't have to go through a charrette,
Yeah.
I think that a lot of them will have to, but it's setting that so that they know what to expect. That's the biggest thing, is make sure that they know what to expect when they come in.
I think requiring them to go through a charrette is going to be a deal killer for a lot of folks. I think that's why we're trying to spell out what we're asking of them.
But I think that we need to put it in there until we get this done, just so that they expect it,
Until which gets done.
until we get the UDO finished.
See,
Are you anticipating that you won't need a development agreement lawyer?
I do anticipate that we'll need that.
Yeah, it seems to me there's no way to avoid it. And we're trying to do a lot of things that the lawyer would normally do. And we're probably putting down a lot of roadblocks to the lawyer. 'Cause I wish Clay Benford would listen to some of this discussion and sit here and shake his head like this.
It'll absolutely go
He'll
through
get
that.
that
And,
chance.
yeah,
Yeah.
if there's anything that needs
Because
to be
he's been our
modified.
CYA left
Yeah.
and right.
Get some-
He's done a good job of looking out after us. But I think that for right now, until we get to that point, we need to define it in our fee schedule, make sure that they realize that there is the legal fee. And for right now, until we can come up with the alternative, there's a charrette fee as well. If we can work past that so they don't have to have it, I'd love that.
I'm just going to play
Right.
devil's advocate. If you have a policy, a development agreement policy document that stipulates, here's what's required and here is what is optional, if you will, why do I need a charrette?
Once we get to that point, I don't think he will.
No, but I'm saying the outcome of this workshop and the scope of work for Matt and his team is to develop a development agreement policy. The purpose of that policy is not just for the UDO, because something else that I was hoping to cover, I don't know if we'll have time, but I was hoping to cover was to go over that now that we've talked, kind of when we get to the end, now that we've talked about all the requirements that you've kind of laid out, here is what is going to go in your UDO, because here's what state law allows you to mandate, and here's what's never going to be in your UDO because state law doesn't allow it. So these items that you've talked about would have to be in a development agreement in order for them to be enforceable at all. And that's my point, is that for the development agreement, the UDO is not going to replace those. We're still going to have development agreements, because much of what you're requiring, I would estimate somewhere between 60 and 70% of what you all have discussed today can't be required. It's going to have to be in a development agreement. It won't, by state law, you can't just put it in your UDO and say, okay, we're done. I don't know if 60,
I don't know.
70%. You're probably,
No,
but-
I don't think that they've included much that can't be in the UDO, actually.
Okay.
I don't think they got outside their lane at all with.
Well, you're going to go over that with us, right?
We are,
Tell
yeah.
us
We're going to
what-
draft this up and we'll come
But
back to
that would
all-
be my
Some
concern,
of the
Mayor,
park
is
stuff.
that to the extent that the UDO doesn't cover it, then there will always be this need for this policy. And I would strongly recommend not making the policy go away once the UDO's there. This is meant to be a stopgap because certain elements of the subdivision regulations will be revised. But I would maintain that there's always going to be a need for a development agreement
Yeah.
policy, and that this will serve as that.
So I'm not, maybe you misunderstood, maybe I misstated. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a development agreement. There needs to be that development agreement policy for the legal fees, but I'm saying, what I was trying to convey is that I think that we should state up front.
Well, you're saying we didn't need a charrette until once you get the UDO. And what I'm saying, okay, that's what you said.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
What happened in my brain went through the filter
That's all right.
before it got to my mouth. What I was trying,
Okay,
I
sorry.
got a funny filter like that.
Okay,
It's
come
really
on,
funny.
we got
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
All right, we'll
And I think we have what we-
But my point with that, if I can just hit that, is that I think that we need to include in the fee schedule that there is going to be a charrette fee, and this is what it is currently. And if we can modify that to reduce it going forward through other mechanisms like this, then we work at doing that. But I think that we need to put a point in the sand that says, this is what to expect. So when the 250 acres over here gets under contract, they know exactly what it's going to cost them to go into.
Okay.
Does that?
That makes sense.
Does that clarify?
Again, my broader concern is just about what are the things that I think are going to be deal killers. And I think on some level, having someone go through a charrette after this is all to get in front of that. Pretty much.
I think that
I'll
the
think about
outcomes
that
of
some
this will achieve that. They're going to have these core standards they have to accomplish regardless. And if they're coming in for incentives, they go through the charrette, and that would be the delineator saying, all right, you want money from us, it's going to be a collaboration. And that would be the line of delineation, I would think. Is that not?
I'm sorry, that was my expectation, because what is legal to be put into a UDO goes into the UDO.
Right.
And if they don't want any kind of incentives, of course, they don't need to go through a charrette process.
Right.
I don't even know that they need to go through a development agreement unless there's utility infrastructure that's required, in which case they would. But everything that I'm saying about the charrette process is if they want incentives.
True.
If they want something back from the city, a PID, a TERS, anything like that, then they would have to go through that.
Okay. I think we have clarity. I know what to do with this.
Okay.
Okay,
Right.
cool. All right, what else?
All right, cool. That was it. Yeah, so next we're going to start drafting, and we'll come back with a draft development agreement policy for you all to review. We'll go through and sort these items, and we'll try and add some clarity. If we have points of clarification, we'll get with your city staff and make sure we can get clarity on those. But thank you all so much for this workshop. This was super helpful, and very piercing clarity was taken away. So we got this.
Is everybody good? Is there anything that we've missed that you wanted to address while we're here?
I do. I want to say that, the decisions you all make as a council will determine the way that your community builds out. It is those decisions every other Tuesday night that you make that ultimately lead to the totality of your community. And you can be anything you want, and you can actually set the standards to be Castroville, and whatever that looks like, you all have the ability to do that. So good job on this journey, and I'm very proud to work with you guys.
Thanks for your help through this.
Yeah, thanks.
Wonderful.
Cool. Anything else?
Are you able to summarize?
I'm sorry?
It doesn't look like you are. Never mind.
What's up?
Are you able to summarize
I'd
the
say, are you
outcomes?
able to summarize kind of the outcomes from today, just what you heard?
Outcomes, next steps?
Is that-
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about the major inputs.
In 5 minutes.
Required
so-
versus-
We have clarity on the block dimensions and how to handle that. I'm going to write some terminology that if you're interfacing with Highway 90, it's going to trigger some provisions, including first step. I think that's important. Write up the, construction feature. Constrained features allows you to break the blocks, so we can come up with terminology for that. Physical and other constrained features, and all my other stuff is in here. We've got, make sure to have a well-connected street network using the block dimensions. Driveway widths are going to be preferred, not required. The cost of infrastructure can't outweigh the development pattern, so the fiscal model will be required. Physically connect the blocks at 90, that's aspirational, and again, it'll be linked back to the US 90 standards or other major thoroughfares, including land with TxDOT or other thoroughfares. What I got must be connected. Let me see. Allow a variety of setbacks to emulate the pattern. That's good. Short blocks retain the dimensions of historic Castroville. Fence standards are going to be allowed but not required for materials. They can make recommendations. Remove the commercial fence standards and allow them to bring those forward. Allow accessory dwelling units but not required. Scale the accessory dwelling to the principal structure. We didn't talk much about that one. Services, we're going to come up with a list of services for 2,500 feet, and then we'll evaluate whether that's the right metrics and come back with a list for those. And then we have ensure dark skies or downlighting. We'll work and then validate with CPS that they have the appropriate fixtures. Path lighting could be for trails as a standard under dark skies. Allow recessed garages behind the principal facade. J-swings, we didn't fully get 100% clarity on that one. We'll draft some language and see if it works within the development agreement. Underground utilities are mandatory, including conduit for electric, mandatory fiber optic to the house. Public Wi-Fi was aspirational, including vaulted, that is going to be preferred. Utilities are going to be powder coated in black for all fixture types. We'll list those. Drainage must be maintained, and an option for, and I think I need to modify this, but to have trails on the drainage ways that would be counted toward their green space. On that, do you want that as a mandatory, they must build trails along the green space, and that offsets it, or is it?
I think it's preferred, but.
Preferred?
Because I know of a development north of here near Medina Lake that has great green space, but you can't get in it.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think that maybe it is, if they want it counted toward green space, it has to be improved to maintain.
Okay.
There you go.
That's a good
Yeah.
qualification. yeah.
so that would be, and so they would draft that with their plan. I think that's a really easy way of seeing that. Okay, and then,
And they'd have to submit it, we'd have to approve it.
right,
Yeah.
yep,
And we have to remember that it's supposed to be in the plan.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, they'll come to us, if it's in the standards, they'll come to us and they'll say, we want this counted toward green space, so here's what we'll do.
And then clarification of when a shred is needed, of a included fee in the fee schedule, and establish a base fee. That's what I got.
So what I didn't hear was building materials.
Never got, yeah.
So building materials right now, we excluded, and I think you had an excellent point about this, we excluded brick for some reason in Alsatian Oaks when we're the home to the Hannah's brick, and we were very proud of that. So I don't know why that was excluded. I wasn't here for that conversation. We didn't talk about the different building, we had someone approach us recently and say, hey, brick to the roof line is impractical in a lot of our different models. I heard some discussion up here, but I didn't hear you repeat it back, and that was on the dormers and the other stuff, like having, what did you call them the other day? The one I circled and said bad. What? The housing types with the little fake,
Oh, fake keystone? Is what you mean?
no, well, fake keystones and
Gaggles
fake
and
little
gables.
roof lines, gables. Thank you.
Gables and gables.
Yeah, the fake. Remember the gable discussion? I know Zach does. It's okay. You were suffering from heat stroke at the time, so I understand why you might not remember.
A
So
lot of the modern roof lines have
But-
a gaggle of gables that are.
Right.
And
Right.
putting the sides on those that aren't over the main.
So I think that's something that we might want to state in our code is a preference for functional dormers,
Okay, yeah.
a preference for functional dormers over gables.
So-
And as far as
so
uses of
if I may.
materials, go
I
ahead.
was up until like 2:30 last night going
Really?
over that document and like making the residential standards from, I think I pulled it out of Cobblestone, and making suggested changes, and like stuff that was removed is crossed out in red and stuff that was added is in green. I don't know the correct way to get that to everybody else. I had hoped we would have time to get to it today, but that did not happen. So I don't know the correct, so he can
What
send
you
it to
sent to
you,
me,
he can send it to
what
everyone
you
else.
sent me to before, I shared with Matt,
Yeah,
but this is
I
something
have that.
else, something new?
Yeah,
No,
it's
this
a
is-
newer version of that that actually
Okay.
has like suggestions on how to improve
Yeah, we can
it.
share that out.
And those are the things you can't put in your UDO.
Right.
These
Yeah.
are the things, yeah.
And that's why I'm hitting it, because these are the things we've actually gotten, we've got someone that's reached out to us 2 or 3 times, a different builder that wants to talk to us about our building standards. And staff needs to know what your mind is before we have those conversations.
Perfect.
But we could just include like, there's this other document, we have a draft of it right now, we're gonna make another draft in what he's writing? Or,
Yeah, I'm gonna, yeah.
Filter your-
I think design standards are gonna be something tough that we'll have to attack at some point.
State
What's that?
state laws limiting us.
Well, you can't require it in the UDO, but you can require it in the development agreement, because we already did.
So that's contractual.
Well, so going back to J swings,
So,
I'm sorry, Scott?
going back to J swings, I think the general direction on garages is that the front, that the preference would be that the garage would not be a part of the principal facade of the structure.
That's it.
Yeah. And that's
That if the garage faces the same direction as the principal facade, that it would be recessed.
At least one car length.
And I think that's enough,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because if you say those two things, then they can come up with their own solutions.
Yep, agreed. And,
Separate building.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. We didn't get to building standards and architectural styles. Generally, those are so site and developer specific, it's hard to write, to preclude those in your development agreement because you may be over prescriptive and limit something out. That was the main reason why we didn't include it.
well, I
think
know
that
on
we-
Alsatian Oaks, we said no cookie cutting. They can't just go down
Yeah.
and have the
Yeah,
same.
you have to
Same
have
floor
a
plan over and over again.
Yeah.
variability of homes
Custom
design.
design.
And that's the same thing I think is true in the MP homes.
yes, it
Yeah,
is.
no cookie cutting.
Right.
All right, so we
I
got,
think that if we concentrate on the built environment, not the buildings, the built environment around it, I think that that's where we have the greatest ability to propagate Castroville as it is without over-limiting, overburdening the builders and developers. Because they're going to, I mean, if you look at existing Castroville, you've got homes from all different types, whether you love them or you hate them.
150, 175 years ago.
So, not requiring, if they want to put gaggles and gables, have them put gaggles and gables, but the built environment around that, you control. Okay, love it. This is great progress, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, so we are through our agenda, and we will adjourn at 5:04. You have a 26-minute reprieve?
This was my friend's 40-mile